County Planning and Zoning meeting to order. It's February 24th, 2022 at 3 p.m. What members do we have of the board are on the phone? We have Ms. Kuntz, are you on, right?
Yes.
Anybody else on the phone or? Okay, then I guess the only one that missing would be Sue Larson then. Okay. First of all, we have the minutes from January 27, 2022, our last meeting. Is there any corrections or changes to the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
Second. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll second that motion.
I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Next on our agenda is Brandy and Mike Johnson in regards to amend the zoning ordinance that allow reception hall in the agriculture zoning district. Mr. Joseph, do you have a comment on that or?
Excuse me, Chairman, do we have ratify? That we don't have the ratification before that, before we go into that? I would just like to ratify to where I would like to speak before the planner, before the public hearing for the rules and articles of the setbacks, please.
Okay. Are the Johnsons here? See,
I'm sorry, Chairman Franchuk, Planning and Zoning Commissioners, I don't believe they are. I met with them with the Johnsons a few weeks ago, and they had talked to me they own 40 acres. They have a farm, they have a barn out there. They would like to be able to have an event center, reception hall. Currently, the zoning ordinance, Stark County zoning ordinance under agriculture doesn't allow that. It's not permitted and it's not allowed as a conditional use permit. And my suggestion to them was to come and speak to the Planning and Zoning Commission and tell them what their plans were, and then, get some direction as to whether or not the Planning and Zoning Commission was interested in amending the zoning ordinance to allow something like that as a conditional use permit. I had sent them an email. They had intended to come. I hadn't heard anything from them, but that's what they were going to speak about.
okay. I guess we'll just wait and see if they show up for next meeting or they ask for you to contact you.
Where is this located, Mr. Josephson?
Oh, you would ask me that, Commissioner. It's north and west of the city of Dickinson. It's not far from the county line. I don't have a precise location for it.
Okay. And we already approved a barn to be used for wedding receptions and everything. That would be south of Richardson, correct?
Let me explain what that was. So that's the Wicks Farm, and actually what they were approved they are here. So they were approved for a hunting lodge. They were actually running a hunting lodge and didn't have a conditional use permit for it. So they were approved for a hunting lodge, and they had an area that they could use that was accessory to it in order to hold receptions like that. This isn't the case with the Johnsons. They've got a barn, and they're here so that you can go ahead and speak to them. As I said, I suggested they come here and talk to you about what they're planning to do. But in the case of the Wicks Farm, they were approved as a hunting lodge with the ability to use a room for reception.
Okay. So was that updated after they were approved for the hunting lodge to be able to use it as reception also?
It was included as part of the conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Johnson's, I see we already started the hearing, but if you want to step forward and just gonna tell, tell me what your plan is. Reintroduce yourself, please.
Mike Johnson,
Okay.
my wife Brandy,
Okay,
and we're just kind of throwing around. There's been some interest about using our barn for weddings, events, and things like that, and just trying to take the right course on seeing what we need to do to make that happen, if it's possible or not. And so our first step was with this gentleman that gave us a kind of a course to take, and We're just trying to do all the general requirements, seeing what it takes. We've been in contact with the city of Dickinson as far as inspection and the fire department as far as fire code. It looks like we've got some structural engineering to have okayed first before they'll come and look at it, and the code analysis. We do have floor plans, so what we're trying to do is just see if it's possible to get the amending the zoning ordinance to use it for that. And what we have is 40 acres of just farmstead, and we also work out of the home, and the barn just sits empty, and we've used it for like graduation and a few other events, and it spurred some interest, and so we're trying to look into that and seeing if that's possible. It's nothing we'd want to really sink a lot of money into. It's just something we want to see if we can make it work.
Steve, is this out of the new ETZ for the city, or?
It's outside of the extraterritorial zone. And I just wanted to say that the city did approve a similar project, but it was in the city's extraterritorial zone and subject to the city zoning ordinance. And I believe it was approved as a social club, so that the people who use it, I forget the name of the facility, but the people who use it, I believe they have to sign, I think there's like a minimal fee for it. That's something I'd find out if I got direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission to pursue a code amendment that would allow the kind of use that the Johnsons are asking for.
Okay. The board have any questions for the Johnsons?
Hi.
Hi.
Dean,
Yes.
I just wanted to know that I am online. This is Sue.
Oh, okay, thank you.
On this, where your barn is located within these 40 acres, how close is a resident that is close to this that might be affected by the noise?
Be a little over a quarter mile we
Okay.
would have.
And have you spoke with those?
We used to rent from them. It was Bernie Marsh.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Is there any other neighbors that'd be affected, or?
Actually, what happened is the previous owner passed away, Todd Valesky, and the property came up for sale. They still own, I believe, 1,500 or 1,800 acres surrounding it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
And you had said you had went through fire code already, or you had somebody from fire
We
code?
talked to them, and they gave us direction for application and what we could look at as far as what would apply to what we're doing.
Okay,
You know, they started with the scary parts of sprinkler systems and such, but we don't have that kind of capacity and or footage. And so we've got some things to do on that. And then, like I say, the building department gave us a list of things to do before we should structure or set up an appointment for them to come and take a code analysis and the like.
who did you contact with the building department?
I'm not for sure who we talked to. Do
Okay.
you remember?
Okay,
But we do have their list of requirements that they want us to do.
okay,
And then the fire inspection. I mean, we have pictures and layouts of the plot that he's given us, and I don't know if you want to look at them or.
sure. Are those in our pack? No, those aren't in our packets. Okay, thank you. That's a beautiful barn. Oh. I'm gonna look and then pass it back. So right here's the rest of them.
So, Mr. Joseph, their next step is to what then, just to go through this or do their inspections or?
At this point, Commissioners, the thing that, right now, as I said, the A zoning district doesn't specifically allow for a use like this, so the next step would be if you wanted staff to come back and bring a proposal on amending the agriculture zoning district to allow this kind of use as a reception hall or something along, or event center or something along those lines. So that would need to be done, and then it's going to be whatever timetable you want. If you want to bring this back and just discuss it at the next meeting and then set a public hearing, that's what I would recommend. That's what I would recommend doing is that it'll give me a chance to go through some ordinances from other communities, other parts of the county, of the state, to see if they have any specific regulations. I imagine, in my mind, this would be a conditional use permit, and that way, things that the county commission can set things like the location, hours of operation, the sort of things that you would do to make a use like this acceptable in that area, and limit the impacts on the neighbors. So, and I'd like to see too what was approved by the city for the, what was it, August House, or I forget the name of the place. I'd like to see that also. So I guess what I'm looking for is direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission. I have told the Johnsons that it could be 2 to 3 months by the time you get the code amended, and then after that, they would come in for conditional use permit. So I'm just looking for direction from the Planning and Zoning Commission at this point. If you want me to go ahead and look at, bring something back to y'all, a potential amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow this kind of use in agriculture.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Quick question, Steve. Aren't you making it awful complicated? Couldn't we put a proposal together, pass something there? Staff could work with this gentleman here. I don't think we need to make it overly complicated, as long as he took the time and due diligence to talk to any neighbors that might be impacted. And it sounds like you talked to the closest one, 1/4 mile, and your next closest neighbor is how far away?
About the same, and that's Rocky, I can't remember his last name now, but anyways, there's really no one around,
And that's what I mean.
within a 1/4 mile anyway, maybe more.
I would just say, Commissioner Richard, the issue is this, is that our ordinance is the law, okay? And under the ordinance, it says what's a permitted use, what's an accessory use, and if something is not listed in there, it's considered a prohibited use. So, something like this could be approved and then challenged and say, it's not in the ordinance, how are you letting somebody do something that's not legally allowed in the ordinance? So it's not a matter of my wanting to make it complicated. It's a matter of making sure that it's legal.
If the ordinance doesn't regulate it, that doesn't mean that it's not approvable.
It means that it's prohibited.
Chairman Franchuk?
Yes.
I believe that our ordinances with planning and zoning are guidelines for Stark County that can be amended at certain times, because we have amended our ordinances to fit the needs of property owners.
Well, they are actually ordinance adopted by law. However, having said that, it can be amended. The
Yes.
ordinance was adopted in public hearing. So in order to amend it, it needs to go to public hearing, which means that we go through that process to do that, to add this use. And what I'm saying is, I think something like this can be done. It can be done properly, out in 40 acres. I think it can be done properly. I'd like to see what the city's was, but as of right now, if a use is not listed in the zoning ordinance, it's considered prohibited.
Can we, sorry, Commissioner Dressler, can we amend with a special use permit, or we just have to change the ordinance at this point?
You have to change the
Okay,
ordinance.
so we
At
need to
this
make a
point.
motion that we add language next meeting, or can we add some language this meeting that would give you some general guidelines to start with?
Give me some general guidance. If you want to hold a public hearing next month.
Oh, right, we need a
To add
public
that
hearing.
in, that's fine, but if you also want to take some time
Sure.
to review it and discuss it before you hold a public hearing, that's what I'm looking for, so.
Okay,
As I'm looking at the ordinance right now, it talks about there's temporary uses for bazaars, carnivals, for public gatherings, for a single purpose event. And it seems like this is just a growth of that, like that's a single purpose. This would be, you could have multiple events at it rather than each time you'd have a single purpose event. You'd have to come get an ordinance. And so I would be in favor of at least seeing what the staff would propose to how we could make this a possibility.
And it just might be as simple as adding under the conditional uses, event center. It could be just as simple as that.
And then once we approve, or once the application is done for a conditional use permit, that's when those specifications come in. If there's hours of operation or if there's other specifications, that's in the conditional use permit. So
That's
it doesn't have
correct.
to be specified in here.
No,
So
not
it can be just
necessarily.
literally adding event, a not temporary use, but just another line item that says an event venue.
Event center, assembly, whatever best would describe it.
Okay.
so if you need a motion, I'll make a motion that we make the next meeting a public hearing to address this issue, and then we can discuss it and make changes at that time. If you don't need a motion, then I withdraw.
I will second that with discussion.
Okay, motion is second. Go ahead with the discussion.
I just think that is, we should move forward with it. I just think that, before the next meeting, when we do have a public hearing, if Mike and Brandy, if you could just bring forward your fire code information, some structural information, get the two, if you could please get, the two neighbors.
Yeah.
Maybe get statements from them.
Yeah.
So then everything is, in that way, this doesn't have to be drug out.
Yeah, we were just, kind of told, we're just,
Yeah.
we're new at it. And,
Yep.
it's just a matter of, is it a hobby, is it a thought, is it a dream, can it be happening?
Yep.
So it's, we can do whatever
And I
is
guess
required, we're just
the other
trying to take
question
the
would be,
right-
are you in a big hurry for this approval? Do you need to know if it takes us 2 meetings, are you gonna be, you're still in planning, so you're gonna be just fine with that, or
Right,
do you have any
yeah,
objections?
we're fine with
Okay,
whatever the course it is. I don't know how fast, the building department moves, or, the
Mm-hmm.
fire department in this case, and lining up structural engineer and
Yeah.
that sort of thing is probably gonna take an easy 30 to 60 days for sure.
hopefully by next meeting, we'll have more info for you then, so.
Right.
And maybe bring the engineer's report or what structurally
sure.
needs to be fixed,
Yep.
just more of that information.
Yeah, I think it has more to do with design load to get capacities and that
Yes.
sort of thing, so.
Okay.
And just to clarify, commissioners, if at the next meeting you recommend approval of the use as a conditional use, and then it's approved by the county commission, then they would put in an application for a conditional use permit and come back to Planning and Zoning Commission. And we always help the applicants get through the process, filling out the application and so on.
Okay, so you would like to see us, or you will contact us to schedule the next agenda as far as what we need to do? In other words, would it be in 30 days or 60 days? Hard to say.
That'll be our next meeting.
Next meeting.
our
Well, next meeting, if it's approved as a conditional use, and then after that,
Okay.
they would have to come to a
And
public
then we'll
hearing
just
after
bring
that.
forward whatever we have at that time and where we're at. Does that work?
March
That'll work.
24th, right? The next meeting, we'd have public hearing on March 24th.
Yes.
March 24th?
Right,
Right.
Try to get here before 3?
yes.
But
please.
Steve is saying that would be the next meeting, so can they submit their application right after approval?
They could,
day?
so they could, if they go to the March, if the county commission approves this in April, then they can turn in an application for the meeting in April and get their approval in May, if that's the timetable that they want. Yes,
Okay.
So Steve, would we work the application with you?
yes,
We'd make an appointment with you then?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. You have any other questions?
No,
Okay,
very pleasant.
okay.
Can I have my pictures back?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we have a motion then on this for,
You got some more here. There you go. I wasn't gonna keep them all.
Okay, we have a motion then. We had vote on that then if there's no other discussion. Commissioner Dressler,
Aye.
Commissioner Arthod,
Aye.
Commissioner Kunz. Commissioner Kunz. Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Walla,
Aye.
Commissioner Sobelik,
Aye.
Commissioner Freilich,
Aye.
Commissioner Richard.
Aye.
The chair votes aye, motion carries. Okay,
you.
we'll see you next month and
Thank you, Commissioners. So what I'll do at this point is I'll prepare a legal ad for the public hearing to amend the zoning ordinance to allow this in the agriculture zoning district. And I will also get an amended text amendment to you as part of the next packet. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, could you email me those pictures too, please?
Sure.
Okay.
okay.
crthought@starkcountynd.gov.
Do I need to get with you before the 24th then, or after?
We can talk before,
Talk before and figure it out. Okay, very good.
Okay, there's nothing further on that. Then move to our next item on here is a public hearing for ZTA 0321, proposed amendments to Article 2, rules and definitions, and Article 6, additional provisions of the Stark County zoning ordinance adopted October 2nd, 2012 regarding wind energy facilities and wind turbines. Commissioner Arthod, you had something?
Yes, thank you. I just, there was some talk about the committee and the way the committee was formed with the setbacks. I would just like to, again, submit it into record and just say that I did put an organized committee together. At no time was it an unorganized committee, for the record. The commission meeting minutes that are on the paper are more vague, but the 2-hour audio is much better. But on this here, I am going to read this for the record. As we had decided, as Carla Arthod moved to recommend the Stark County Board of County Commissioners, the approval of the amendments, of the rules and definitions of Article 8, Carla Arthod moved okay, I'm going to move forward. Chairman Franchuk closed the public hearing. Sandra Crown, I'm going to go look at, I'm sorry, I mean, like that, I don't want to read it all for everybody and bore them.
Second page.
On the planner items, Planner Steve Josephson provided information on wind energy facility setbacks in Stark County and in other counties in North Dakota. Planner Steve Josephson is looking for direction to make changes to our current wind energy facilities ordinances. During commission discussion, the board discussed forming a committee. Sandra Kuntz moved to recommend to the Stark County Board of Commissioners to approve that a committee be formed of 11 members, including 4 Planning and Zoning Board members and 7 members from the public. Byron Richards seconded this. All voted a motion was carried. Planning and Zoning members included Carla Arthod, Sue Larson, Sandra Kuntz, and Deneen Dressler. The public will contact Nicole Roberts to provide their contact information. Now, on the audio, it had said also that the public could contact Steve Josephson, and the public could also contact Dean Franchuk. At the time, Nicole Roberts come down with a medical issue, and she went and forwarded to me that anybody that was going to call her, she was going to forward to me. At that time, from the 4 that were included with the planning and zoning members, there were already people that were at the meeting that volunteered. The only ones that called in to Nicole Roberts was a man and wife, husband and wife. I informed them that because of the fact I didn't want to create any type of, I just didn't want the husband and wife to be both on there because I thought that would be a conflict and I didn't want any nepotism. So I had asked them for one or the other to be contacted. Commissioner Messer contacted me and also gave me a name of Corey Elkin Hoffman from the Richardson-Taylor area, so that part of the county would also be included on this committee. There was one person left on the committee to be called, and I had called Tom Reichert. I knew he was part of a committee before, and he was on the southern part of the county, so I knew there would be representation from there. So Dustin Stuber, Christy Goodall, Dean Berwick, Marilyn Hondel called in but pulled back. Dale Berwick called in and pulled back. Al Shook decided not to. Rick Leach decided not to. Andrew Cordnoy decided not to. We put Corey Hoffman on. Tom Ely was on. And Tyler Shook did not get on the commission. But everything was followed according to the way that meeting was set up and the guidelines on how this committee was to be set up. And I just want to verify for the record that at no time did I put an unorganized committee together. There was one other thing on there that there was comments made also that I wanted to set the record straight, that I did not tell the truth at the July meeting. When I asked somebody a question that had to do with an energy company, I met with him the day before and he gave me information about transmission lines in a substation already being on the Marathon site. At that next meeting, that came up again, and I again asked him, and he had said no. So I do have a statement from Christy Goodall, because she was there at the meeting, that is exactly what he said, and that's why I asked him the question at the open meeting. And he had said no, and that's why I asked him the question again. Now, do I know if One Energy put that substation in? No. But that person made that comment that a substation was already placed and the transmission lines were placed on the Marathon refinery. So I just wanted to make sure, because I had heard that this had spread with the Planning and Zoning Committee, and this had also spread without the community. So I wanted to clear everything. I wanted to make sure everybody understands that I did follow protocol and everything was done correctly. Thank you.
Any other comments before you go? What I just want to say is the setback committee was proposed ordinance on that, and we'll go from there. Now I think it's time that this board just takes over this and decides what we need to do to move forward with this ordinance. That, decides if we need to do further study or reviews or whatever we need to do to make this, but the proposals have been submitted by the committee, and thank you for your effort. I'll open the public hearing then at this time, if there's nobody else. Any comments? Open the public hearing. Anybody has any comments?
I did submit, I'm Christy Goodall, and I was at that meeting with Carla Arthod, and if somebody is calling her a liar, then they're calling me a liar as well. Because during that meeting, I am just going to verify, and I did write a verification statement, that during that meeting that exactly was stated, that there was already a substation with transmission lines already put on the Marathon site. And when Ms. Arthod asked about that again in the next meeting, he directly denied that he had said that in that meeting. So if anyone is calling Carla Ms. Arthod a liar, they're also calling me one as well. And it was directly what was said. And I have been lied to on numerous occasions, of which I have documentation of, from that same committee in the same facility, for what it's worth. Also, I'm very disappointed if we do not move forward with the committee that was created. I was at the commission meeting when that was asked, if anyone would like to be on this meeting to design these setbacks, to please contact Ms. Arthod, please contact Mr. Josephson, and all of us that volunteered for that committee did so because it was approved at that county commission meeting to do so, and that's how that was moved forward. And so it was very disappointing at the last county commission meeting, that what our recommendations were are not even being considered, and Mr. Josephson has moved forward with his own committee. So I'm really, I'm at a loss as to if this is how we do business. And that's all I have to say.
Commissioners, I'm going to clarify the comments of Ms. Goodall. Staff has not set up any committee. There is no other committee at this time.
Well, and I did want to comment as well. I did work with Steve Josephson somewhat. I was on the subcommittee and I did work with Steve. I guess I don't know of any other accusations, but I can just say what was done with me. Dustin Stuber and I worked with Steve, Mr. Josephson, and we clarified some points that we wanted some verbiage. We wanted some assistance on some verbiage, mostly so all the things that he's got in this packet today, I think we should go over. We felt like it represented our group pretty well. And I think Mr. Josephson also had some really good input that we thought after talking back and forth, and we documented all this and we submitted it to the whole committee on emails. But we should just talk about it all today. I think no matter what, I think we should sit down and speak as to what level we want to, if there's any changes that need to be made. I think this is what's presented. They're not concrete at this point. They're very fluid. The recommendations by a subcommittee to this committee, and they can be changed. And so I would propose we just sit down and take a deep breath and everybody bring their comments forward. What do you want to see changed? Let's go through some of those things that you feel, because we know they're not perfect and we know that there's going to be some changes to them, and that's okay. We just want to get everyone on this board's opinion, and we want to do it in front of the public so that you, as the public, also have that input. And I think that's very important. If there's any problem with us forming a subcommittee, that's okay. We don't necessarily have to follow the guidelines of that committee. It was just a research committee, and any of the things that were brought forward, they were researched. We felt like they were done well, and we now can look at that research and decide if that's what we want here. We are in no means criticizing anyone or saying they're not going to be looked at. And I think Mr. Josephson did look at them with us, and we did ask him for a little bit of clarification, because we knew that we needed some, and we'd also like Amanda here to give us additional clarification on a couple of things. The bonding issue was one of them that we knew we needed some input from everyone on, because we honestly don't know if that can be in this language. If we knew what we wanted to see, we just didn't know if this was the place for it. And so we can give our general concepts, and then we can use legal and staff to help us make those proper and fit the ordinances in a legal format. And that's all we were trying to do here. And we wanted to do that prior to the meeting so that this would be a little bit more efficient. So I think it's prudent that we go through that, get public information, public comment on what they want to see. Steve's got his comments nicely listed here, and we can see what he commented on. But all of this has been seen before, so now we're just going to go through it as a board. So I don't need to take up a whole bunch of everyone's time. I just think the next step would be that we should bring up any comments that we have that we don't understand, because a lot of this stuff might be new to people, and then maybe we could discuss it as to what our intent was, and make sure that the verbiage clarifies our intent, because clearly that's very important, and that's where we need legal to step in and say, is our intent being displayed properly? Because none of us are lawyers, so we're not necessarily going to say this is 100% perfect. That's for sure. So I encourage the board to have an opinion. Everyone needs to weigh in on this, and if there's things that you guys want to see different. Now that we've seen the maps, there might be some differences, because some of our recommendations looked a lot different once you applied it to the actual properties. So there might be some changes to the wetlands situation was one thing when we designed that ordinance. The wetlands inventory map that we saw online looked a lot different than the one that was presented. There was a lot less small tributaries and dried up creek beds in there. So we really did not intend for that to be quite as intertwining, I guess. It looked a little bit different than the one we saw going forward here. So that is obviously something we'll need to address. It's just it wasn't the same map that we saw online, so it was much more detailed. And so I think our clarification might need to come in the fact that we have to define which rivers are big enough to be considered a river, and some of the dried up creek beds and things might not be applicable, or obviously that could be changed. So it's something that we just need to discuss and see if it's something that we want to make changes to, because some of these things look different once you apply it to the actual county, and they so nicely did that here for us. So I think it's good for us to all take a look at it and see what it is we want to make work. So if anyone else wants to dig in,
Chairman Dean?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
This is Sue. I just wanted to add a comment to what Deneen just said. She stated it very clearly and very correctly. We do have, at this point, that has come back to the P&Z committee, this committee's recommendations. It is our duty to go through them and to make sure that they're addressed fairly and equally. And at this time, everybody that does have input should be adding their point of view. That is the way that we are representing the public in our duty on the P&Z. And also, because this is a public meeting, I believe we have to continue with the public meeting until it's closed before we can go forward with any changes.
can we discuss actively with the public, Amanda?
You want to have your public meeting and then close that, and then you guys
Then
start
we
commenting
discuss.
and abstaining.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions for the public?
Christy Goodall again.
Does everybody in the crowd have a copy of this?
No.
Okay.
Want me to wait?
Which document are you referring to?
The final one, the draft?
It's not a final, it's,
Well, I mean, the draft that's here for today.
we can hand some of those out.
I'll wait for a moment then.
Do you want me to do that, Steve?
Yeah, I'm get.
We have 3.
I think we have more. Hold on a second. Do you have a packet over there with, it's that one. Yeah, we'll get you other copies. Here's another one. Here's another one. Do we need to make more copies of this, or?
It's right here.
Okay, that's my copy. Oh. Okay.
You can go ahead.
One of the things, Christy Goodall again, and I'm not sure how many people have, took a look at this, and it's actually pretty critical when we're talking about wind development energy in North Dakota. I don't know, not even 9 months ago, June of 2021, the North Dakota Game and Fish put together a 62 page document on wind energy development in North Dakota best management practices. And the Game and Fish has several recommendations in that. And when you go through all of this, a lot of it has to do with the wetlands that Ms. Dressler talked about. In particular, if we talk about just an area of a wetland where I'm just saying in general, if we talk about areas of wetlands, one of the recommendations of the North Dakota Game and Fish is to do a Raptor Studies, for example, a 2-year Raptor study. Because when we look at this setback, it says, note, if the turbine height is 450 feet, the setback's 450 feet times 2.5 equals 1,125 feet. That is not enough when it comes to raptors, when it comes to our birds of prey. I'm going to tell you right now, I live a mile from the proposed area, the area that's proposed by the Marathon wind turbine site. And during that time, and I have several photographs that I've taken of raptors that are in direct line of sight of the energy plant itself. Not only that, I've seen bald eagles, golden eagles, as well as several other types of hawks and birds of prey in that area. It is also one of the main nesting sites, if you read through this, of the brown-nosed bat, the little brown bat. And bats have a range of several miles of their nesting area. And what that does, as you know, bats eat 1,100 mosquitoes every night. I mean, so there's just so much impact to wildlife in that area. And again, I've taken photographs of that showing that we have raptors in those areas. And with raptors come nesting sites for those endangered species. It's just something that I think we need to really be addressing when we're talking about setbacks from wetland areas and setbacks I feel like even in that Heart River area, we do need to address a raptor study to find out exactly what nesting sites are there. Because when you have actual visualization of those raptors in those areas, a golden eagle doesn't know what 1,125 feet is from a wind turbine. A bat doesn't know what 1,125 feet is if it's within their area. And this study goes on, if this 62-page study goes on to say how many animals are actually affected by those turbines. And so I just think that needs to really be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comment?
My name is Dean Berwick. I'm a Stark County taxpayer. And I was on this committee, and like Carla said, as far as what the committee was doing, we delegated certain things out to certain people, and they would go ahead and do the research and back this stuff up. So everything that you're looking at pretty much has a factual base behind it. We also were given a multi-county sheet to look at that they had used for setbacks. I believe it was either from Steve Josephson or Amanda. And we use that. And a lot of these things that we have got aren't even the setbacks don't go as far as some of these other counties. And so I think as far as myself today, what I think ought to be done by the end of the day is we vote on this thing. And then if you need to do amendments to it, then we do amendments to it. But there was a lot of hours by a lot of people, a lot of these committee members that put a lot of time in this. And I think it needs to be looked at for real. And if they're going into the questions and answers, we have the facts for you. So, I like as far as infrasound, as far as ice throw, as far as decommissioning the turbines. For what Stark County's got to decommission a turbine, I believe it's $20,000. Doesn't even come close to the what we come up with. And we actually got letters from NextEra saying this, that, hey, this is what it costs to decommission one of these turbines. So it's out there, and we have this information. So I think that we've got enough stuff in here for a vote. And then I think we ought to, if you want to amend something or the verbiage is a little different, hey, let's amend it and do it that way. But I think by the end of the day, this ought to be voted on. We cannot keep stringing this thing on. Thank you.
Anybody else from the public have a comment? Any other comment from the public? You have anybody on the phone that wants to comment? Anybody else from the public?
Chairman Franchuk, so just so I understand that right, when we close the public hearing and we go through this, And if any of the public has any input to say on what they decide or what they'd like to see, then that is closed and they cannot make comments on this as we are going through it as a board?
Better off just reopening or having another public hearing afterwards, just to keep the record. You guys should have your conversations and do it. And now that there's input that needs to be
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, if there's no other comment from the public, then I'll close the public hearing then, and we'll go into the discussion on it and.
Excuse me, Dean Berwick again. So what you're saying is you're gonna close this, so we're not looking at even voting on anything, you know, other than we're just gonna discuss this here and then decide to put it off again and expect people to keep coming back here.
That's
Is
what
that
our
we're
discussion,
doing?
that's what our discussion is. We're discussing now. It's even
Why don't we
come to some.
discuss it right now?
That's what we're doing. We're
Why
gonna
don't we
discuss
leave it
it.
open?
Mr.
There's- if
Mr.
you just
Berwick,
heard
we're gonna we closed it?
Excuse
We're
me.
gonna sorry, go ahead.
We already said, Amanda said we'd open the hearing after we discuss some things, or we could open up a public hearing again, so then you have time with them then, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry. Mike, did you give one to Christie?
Okay,
Christie? Oh,
I'll go ahead and start with my input.
Okay.
I've been reading through this policy many times, and I see that there's been a lot of research done, and I know the committee was formed properly. All the committee was formed, you can see in the line directly below it, by people that were voicing concern against it. And I feel like we do need to have some discussion on, yes, this committee is against it, but there are people in our county that don't mind wind energy. And I don't feel like we can only see this one way. And so I do feel that there needs to be some change in our intent, that there could be some reasonable setbacks that could allow this. Because we've already lost a contract on a business that was looking at us. And if we are gonna just close our county, that is a huge concern in my mind. We need to be looking toward the future. The governor has a 2030 carbon neutral plan for our state or goal. And if we're not willing to participate in that in our county, we will not have development in our county. And I know you say wind turbines will reduce the value of our county, but if we have no more businesses in our county, we will have no value in our county either. There has to be a complement between how can we do this correctly, but not how can we just make it a moratorium for life. We have to find the right way, and it has to be somewhere on middle ground that we can have properly used wind turbines in proper used areas, not just in one little itty bitty square at the south end of Stark County, but properly used throughout our county and in a way that is protecting neighbors, so that it's not out our, like if this is my front window, I don't want to look out at it. That's fine, that I understand. But we also need to give the people rights, that this is the way our country is. Our state, carbon neutral is what people are looking for. And even if our county doesn't have people today jumping up and down for wind energy, which I don't believe we do, we will not be able to distribute we have many manufacturers here that distribute throughout the world. And if we don't work on our carbon neutral here, I feel we will be limiting our current manufacturers and then bringing in big new businesses. When our Stark Development gentleman, why did his name just evade me? Mr. Gillick, when he came in, I think it was in December when I wasn't able to be here because we had city commission that day. When he came and shared that we lost out on a $2.5 billion business, they just said, no, you're not a county we want to deal with. And so I think we need to look at how can we become a county that people want to work with because we're workable. And not that we're going to just let them walk all over us, but we're also not just going to put our foot down and walk all over them and say, we don't want you. And so my goals in our conversation would be that I would like to see, yes, restrictions, but less restrictions. And restrictions that would have this planning board and our county commissioners making a decision, not just the one that's presented today is so cut and dry that there is no need for a planning and zoning or a county commission to approve anything, because there's very minimal check boxes that can be checked to make it happen. But we have elected officials on purpose to help us decide what's right for our community. And so make some restrictions, but then also some kind of a caveat that our governing board that we elected is who can help make that decision in the long run, so that we're open to conversations. And we do not have to have something that, yes, we're going to put wind turbines on every corner. That is not what I'm saying, but I want to see something that would be more open to development in our county and our community.
Chairman Franchuk? I agree with you. I mean, I agree that we don't want to lose economics, and there's been, I mean, carbon capture is coming in huge. I mean, that is a huge thing that is coming to this area. I mean, look what Richardson is doing. I really think that maybe down the road, the wind energy and all of that is going to be not on the top of the list, and carbon capture. We do have wind energy to where there could be lines, there could be transmission lines to connect to them to get the carbon credits, but there wasn't any interest in that on one side. So we
I'm not talking about any certain cases here. I'm just talking in general.
Yep. But I mean, there is ways to work around that to still protect the residents of Stark County that have been paying taxes all their lives, to where it's not right for them to have to live within 2,000 feet of these or more because of the fact of the health. And I mean, it's not just about economics on this to me. I mean, I want economics for Stark County, but I also want the health of my residents. I also want their property values to stay the same. I also want them to be protected because they've been here and their grandparents have been here forever. So I want them protected also.
And I think maybe what would help too is if we could just give them a choice. What I was trying to see happen, or what I'd like to see happen, more betterly described, is that just make the ordinances protect those that have property, but maybe don't necessarily, whoever might be interested in putting a turbine down. I just want to see that more people within a certain distance of that turbine get a choice to participate, and that they have to work with. So a lot of these things are fairly strict if they don't participate with the landowners around them. So really, I think we should look at it from two directions. You should protect the citizens, but if those citizens who own that property adjacent or right next to these turbines within a certain distance want to participate, that's wonderful. They can sign off on it, or they can make a deal with the companies. I think with the density that we're looking at already in our county, the projects that we're probably going to see going forward are going to be fairly small. And I think Steve Josephson and I had talked about that at one time, and he agreed that we're just very densely populated. So we're probably going to be looking at smaller, more direct businesses that might do it in fewer quantities. It's not probably looking at these larger projects anymore just because of our density. But if those few turbines that they're looking at here, there, wherever in the future, if they want to put them up, you just, it would alleviate a lot of problems as long as they would just work with all the neighbors around it. And I don't think that's asking too much, just based on the problems with the 1 mile. Like, one of the big things, in my opinion, is the 1 mile fling of debris around a turbine. So everyone within 1 mile of that turbine should have safety and welfare, right? All the properties around it. I don't care if it's a amusement park, and if there was like a common occurrence where within 1 mile of whatever structure flying debris was happening, we of course would protect everyone around that, whether it's a cow or whether it's somebody's barn or whether it's a house or whether it's a school or whatever it might be. You of course want to protect that property in that diameter, and I think that's what we're trying to do here. If some of them are strict looking, we also need to make sure we look at that language that says, that particular setback doesn't apply if that person is a participant. So we need to make it clear that participants have one. And of course, you can also write in language that says these participants can also sign off on anything we wrote it in there for their benefit, but if they so choose that they want to abandon their house and not live there anymore, whatever it might be, and they want to allow this, they should be allowed to do that. And that's the language that we should put forward, is that, if that particular property owner is being paid to leave and he decides that's worth it to him and he wants to abandon his place and put a tower there, that's fine. We really just want to protect the people that are there, that have been there for a long time, and that possibly don't want to leave, and they shouldn't be forced to leave. And I feel like right now we're just a little too close to those non-participating landowners with our current setbacks. So that's why we're looking to give them some space so that they are protected, and all of their property is protected, not just a house, so that if they have livestock or other animals that are in the radar of that particular tower, that they're also protected. And that, to me, is one of the most important things that can come out of today, is that we give everyone the opportunity for safety and or the opportunity to participate. So they should be able to say, yes, I will, obviously those that do participate and at this moment usually have a tower on their land, but that doesn't mean that we can't set a standard that says you can also participate with this landowner right next to him. And that would change the course of the setback. You'd both just have to come forward and say you signed off on that, and that's how it would work. So I don't feel that would be as restrictive if you give them those opportunities to work with multiple landowners, not just the one. That would open a lot of doors for smaller, more pointed projects that would be, in certain areas. But it would just be a lot less contentious, because then all of those people together could work together to make that project happen. And again, I don't feel that we have a whole lot of space, even with our current setbacks, for big mega projects. We just don't. And so what we're looking at here is going to be smaller, more minimal projects than from what you're seeing out in the open, vast countrysides. So I think that this can happen. I think we can be fair to everyone. We just want to protect those that feel they don't need to go hire a lawyer to protect their property. That just isn't right to me. They should have an opportunity to make their property a participant or not, instead of being forced to.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
why don't we move into there? Let's go to page 5 and down to B there. And we'd be in, let's just start there, 6.19.5. We'll be on page 5 though. And you're talking, those that have the map out there, it deals with the map here that 3 miles structural minimum setback. If we're gonna go along with that, well, that's all we gotta put in there. We can get rid of everything else. We don't need anything else. That'll pretty well shut the whole county down. Maybe we need to look at that one a little bit here. Maybe 3 isn't the optimum number. I guess I'm open to input from some other members here. Maybe that number's probably a little bit to the extent to where it's not viable. If we put something like that, well, then we pretty well just alleviate the whole county. I would propose maybe a number about half that distance, but I wasn't on that committee. The committee put some legwork, and of course, I'm looking for input from some of the people that were out there that actually did, like Dean and them. But starting with you, Deneen here, what's your thought on that?
I think I'd be open to looking at other things. It was designed to protect that person from not, getting overridden and forcing companies to work with these landowners instead of going around them. But of course, if that's too big for our comfort zone, we can look at something else. That's just, we had reasons for doing that. And again, it was a lot to try and get people to work together instead of against each other, and give them that comfort of some of the areas. It had a lot to do with the health reasons. people with certain health conditions. There's a lot of issues with sleep and headaches, and that's actually up to like 8 miles. So we were taking a lot of these studies into consideration when we settled on 3. There's just a lot of information out there based on infrasound and what it does to a lot of people that live near them within 8 miles of a tower. So we felt like 3 was a safety concern, that anyone living within 3 miles should have the consideration of either saying yes or no, I want that next to me. But if no, it's just completely up to this board. But that's why we chose it. But yes, as you can see, if there are not participants according to that map, they would have to get, if they decided to put one in one of the lower corners or something, they would have to get a number of different landowners together to say yes. You'd be looking at possibly 2 or 3 different, maybe 4 different people in order to place a turbine. Again, it's not as big of a feat if you're only talking about a few turbines. But, and then if you stay away from large populations, like you probably should anyway, just because the larger the population, the more likely you're going to have folks in that being represented by those specific people that do have problems, severe problems with this electro infrasound. And so there's a lot out there on it. There was a ton of data brought forward, and it was hard to ignore, because they're starting to move towers in other countries, Australia and various places, that people are having really big issues and they're proving it. And so it's like, I just feel like we really should stay away from large clusters of populations, because there's so much data out there showing health, degenerative health problems right next to them. So I just want to get the participation of all those. If they chose a smaller area with less people, obviously they'd have to work with less people that way, and that to me feels more equitable than forcing someone out of their home.
I guess the other thing too is, I think we always, when possible, encourage them to tap into existing wind energy. I can't believe it. These companies, when you referred to the one that you brought up, why they wouldn't have the opportunity to utilize what existing wind energy that's already in the county. Why they have to start from scratch and still not be eligible for some of the green components that they're after there. So that's one I'd always like to see encouraged. But on the same token, I'd like to ask state's attorney, if we were to say put that at 1.5 miles, it would, granted, it would probably might open up a few spots that would be available, but would that hold up if we had to litigate that? Or would we still be considered a very restrictive county?
I'd have to look at it on the map. I think Steve made a good point on here, and I think one of the major things is all of the setbacks that you decide should probably have the option for a variance. So if you're going 3 miles, but you have the option for a variance, well, then at least it gives the board the opportunity to hear all of the feedback that would come from the community, as opposed to just boxing it out completely. Because right now, the only one that has a variance is subsection F, and Steve did make that point in his notes, that if you start looking at adding variances, or at least giving the option, I think, Deneen, that goes to your point, then it makes the surrounding neighbors and wind energy have to work more closely together, because if they want a variance, they're going to have to come and explain to the board, and I would imagine the board's going to be a lot more receptive to things like that if there's more people that are in agreement. As far as, I looked at 3 miles when I see this. This is, I don't know what 1.5 miles looks like, so to give you an absolute answer on that, I couldn't tell you for sure.
And one of the other reasons we felt like it was prudent is because it was out there already in other counties. One of the other counties that has a similar ordinance is Divide. And so they also have a 3 mile, and that's currently in place. So we felt like it was represented by others, and that it would would be prudent to assume that it could also be represented by ours if this board so chooses. But that's one of the other historical references that we made was based on that county as well. So, but yeah, we can definitely discuss.
If we do the variance, we definitely put ourselves on a sounder structure as far as litigation there. It probably wouldn't, and then we could probably go 2 miles. I mean, or maybe 3 is the match. I don't know, but as long as we got the variance in there, create a little bit of
Amanda, can you explain exactly how that would work? If three, that would mean if 3 landowners came up together and said, yes, we want to work together, whatever X energy company is giving us each some compensation, and we're gonna allow them to place this tower right in the middle of our properties, they're basically allowed to sign off on that and say, yes, we wanna do that, and then the board can approve that.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we would like to do, or I would like to do anyway.
And Chairman Franchuk, the reason we also had done with the 3 mile, we did this with the 3 miles is so the non-participating landowners wouldn't get left out. With the wind farm that came in before, I feel really bad for the non-participating landowners that now have to live in proximity of, because they went from the dwelling of the non-participating landowner. They did not go from the property line of the participating landowner. So that means they went from the dwelling, and so if the dwelling of the non-participating was 500 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever, they used that in their setback. So that could make to where this wind turbine was just right there on the property line of the landowner. And there's some people now that have them surrounding their houses. And it's really hard for them. They've had health problems, and their property values are now struggling, and we just on this part, and they're not getting any compensation. So if we add this in, and then they get a group of people together that do agree, then at least everybody, even though they wouldn't have a wind turbine, they would agree. It would be fair for everybody. Then would get some compensation.
I just wanted to make a comment, Commissioners. If you go down to F under setbacks, there's already some language that talks about, how to get a variance from a setback. That was already in the ordinance, and that might be something you could say, well, this applies to any of the setbacks or whatever, but it talked about, but you can see that language if you go down on page 5, if you go down to F, there was a process in there about getting affected parties on adjoining properties, to sign a formal and legally binding agreement expressing their support for a variance and a waiver.
Mr. Chairman, this is Sandra Coons.
Go ahead.
I have a couple suggestions. Having heard the concerns and being on the committee, these provisions as they were drafted came with the support in terms of concerns about health, concerns about impact on the environment. I would suggest, if you're going to balance the ordinance with options for a variance, that you keep the burden on the person coming forward to provide, for example, an environmental study, the Raptor Study, a health study, as a prerequisite to a variance being granted. That way you keep the burden on those that are looking for a change that will have a significant impact in the area, but you don't end up having the little guy having to take on, deep pockets in a sense. And that seems to be a better balance for our county as opposed to the other way around. So I would suggest, for example, on your section 6.19.2, you add additional subsection H that says you have to have compliance with North Dakota Game and Fish best practices or best wind energy practices. If that means studies for the type of wildlife habitat we have there, then those studies are part of the application process. But then you will have that much more information for planning and zoning as well as the whole commission to make their decisions when that application is coming forward based upon the uniqueness of that particular area. And everybody isn't wondering about the what ifs, but that information then has to be readily available or the project does not move forward.
Ms. Kuntz, what number were you referring to on this, please?
I believe it would be page 2, and it would fall right in line with what starts on page 1 as section 6.19.2, where it defines what that wind energy siting permit or the application for permit would consist of, and it has subsections A through, I believe, G currently, and I would simply add, one or two provisions that says, as to the impact on the habitat, you have to have that environmental study or game and fish best interest practices compliance, and then an additional subsection to that, a study as to the health impacts for surrounding landowners, so that you know whether it's one person or a highly condensed area. I don't see being able to make a decision that one person's life is worth that much less than if there's 10 involved. And so I'm a little concerned about hearing that we're gonna keep them away from big populations, but where it gets a little sparser, then they're on their own. I don't think that's protecting those individuals as well. And it's usually going to be those individuals in the sparser areas have the least amount of resources, and it makes them that much more vulnerable to being run over. So I think our role in protecting all the citizens in the county is to make sure even the little guys have some protections written right in black and white that those wanting a change have the burden to overcome. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I guess
Yes.
I would propose on that one there, let's use a variance, so at least you give I think it helps us from a litigate standing point, one thing. We should probably look at maybe 2 miles on that. And I think you'll probably find it fairly restrictive in the county, even under that scenario as well, but it would definitely protect individuals that are out there, and 2 miles is quite a distance.
Any other comments?
Commissioner Richards, I mean, I agree. We can go down to 2 miles. I would just like to maybe echo what Ms. Dressler said, with the infrasound, that was 12. That it traveled 12, but we did go down to 3, so we really worked with it. But, I mean, I agree. I can agree with the 2 miles.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
let's go to C and just visit a little bit on that one as well. Is that one that would be covered under a variance as well, if we left it like it's set up?
You're referring to the property line setback?
Yes.
It would be for everyone unless they had written consent by the property owners. So participating and non-participating, but they can again sign off on that.
Under no situation a variance would be involved with that one, or could we look at variances on some of them to at least give the commission or the P&Z board the opportunity in an extreme circumstance? I can't think of which one would be up there, but you don't know. Sometimes we've seen some unusual things come forward. again, my hope is that we encourage people to go up to the existing facilities, but if they do, when we get into a special project,
Well, it would make them work together.
make them work together, but with the variance, you at least give yourself just a little bit of room as a planning and zoning board if you,
But without the variance, they can't even work together, right? I mean, like,
they could
the-
work,
it's
they'd have to work
limiting
together.
them.
But I think there's maybe scenarios where this board may have to have a little input.
Without the variance, they could work together. The
So this
non-participating.
isn't a rule if I would get everyone in the neighborhood to sign off? Everyone within 1 mile of my property? The property line setback isn't a rule then?
Correct. Any
Isn't
land.
that a variance?
Well, not technically. The variance would be, you could override somebody's sign. So if there was 5 people that were in agreement and one person was not, and they were in that mile, then the county then could override that one person.
And
That's what a
there
variance
is
can
nothing
do.
in this document that led me to believe that I could visit with my neighbors and then do what I want essentially. And so, but that is the way we're talking. And so I have that is one area that I'm confused and gray on is, how do we include that we want to encourage neighborly behavior, like that is our goal. It really seems the goal of this policy is to create good neighborly behavior. Let's work together as a community and get what's right done. And so in this, it's a list of rules, not a list of, hey, go work with your neighbor. And so how could we state something like that, or what would be the proper way to put that in there? Because if I'd read this, I don't gather that at all. I've absolutely heard that from
Yeah.
you guys, is that it's the intent, but I haven't seen that.
Well, like with C, it is written in there without written consent by the property owner. So we can reword that to say if written consent or if participation is provided. And a lot of the variances that are out there in other counties have similar language to that, where they're saying, here's the rule, but if you get neighbor A and neighbor B to say, no, you can come closer than 1 mile to my property line. And of course, if you're a participating landowner, you're going to sign off on that because you understand that you work with the company and this is where I'm going to put it on my property. And then, of course, you sign off on that. It's really to protect the non-participants. But of course, the goal was to make non-participants participants so that both these landowners work together to say, yes, you can put it here.
So
even though it's not.
they're a participating owner, like if they're getting financial gain from, like it's in my view shed, so now I think that's worth X number of dollars a year. Now they've become a participating member,
Well,
they're not a non-participating
And you don't
anymore?
necessarily have to pay them, but probably that would be part of the reason. Like, if someone was dead set against it, and then you compensated them accordingly, like you would if it was right. Let's say it's right beside your property, and it's on your neighbor's land technically, but it's right, you're a neighboring right there, right? That's what seems to be causing all the conflicts, is those folks that are right beside it.
I don't know how to mute this.
Then they can say, okay, I'm also, the company that wants to place the turbine can also talk to this next landowner and say, I understand you're going to have some property devaluation. I'd like to compensate you accordingly. Or maybe it's family members that both own it and they just sign off on it without any compensation because they're already getting compensation and they want to allow it without. It doesn't mean they have to pay them. It just means they have to get their sign off and say that they're okay with it. And that was the point, is that participating doesn't necessarily mean that the turbine is on their property. It just means that the landowners within a certain setback radius are all participating with the project, if that makes sense. And maybe we worded that badly, but that was the intent. And we certainly can reword it if everyone agrees on the intent. And that's what I'm hoping we can do today, is make the language very clear.
Well, and I think that's what we want to do if we're going to get this to a vote. If we put a variance in there, that's an rare occasion. If we see something that pops out of the extreme there, at least the commission could at least have an opportunity to address it. But I have no problem with the 1 mile. I think the way you got it worded in there, it gets people to at least participate and talk. But let's have a variance in there on the off chance something would pop up where there seems to be a consensus on P and Z to step in and try to rectify the problem. And I think for litigation purposes, I think there's gotta be a variance on a few other ones perhaps too, but I think it does protect us a little bit too, in regards to trying to work.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I guess I echo some of the sentiments that Commissioner Soblik has already voiced. As you read this, it's a little bit different than what Commissioner Dressler, you've said, of trying to encourage people to work together to find common ground. And so that's what I hope that we all get there. I'm going to jump back, Commissioner Richard, to go up, and I look at letter A on the same page where it says habitable structures, and I believe a comment that Mr. Josephson put in on the sidebar is I think we do need to define what those habitable structures are, because there are structures out there that maybe they've been a house that a farmstead, somebody's been abandoned for a few years. It's still a structure, it's still got walls, it's still got a roof over it, but is it habitable?
And we did talk about this, Steve and I did, and I did see some language in some other counties since then. They just put a value minimum, so if it's not worth more than, say, $5,000 maybe, you can say it's not considered habitable, so that you're not getting into a war of words, because you can define it all day long, but ultimately, I think Divide County's got one right here that says value more than $25,000. So they're using similar language, but then they're putting a value on it just so, and we can pick whatever number we want for valuation, but it might be more clear. Yeah.
In my research on definition of that was, one of the definitions was used on a day-to-day basis.
There was a wind turbine that did have to be moved here in North Dakota because they used it as a hunting cabin, so it wasn't lived in all the time. And the setback and the variance did not match to that habitable place because they were using it and it was livable. So that turbine did have to be moved.
So it had running water, it had electricity too. It wasn't just like a log cabin with, it's essentially a glorified tent or something. Like, it had all the amenities of being a home. And so I don't know, like at the city, we've just gone through some, now I can't think of the right word, but
Yeah, okay.
condemnation hearings. And, if there isn't potable water, well, it's not habitable anymore. And so there is some structure, there could be some very simple things like that, just because it's got it's a shed, it's got 4 walls, but it doesn't have other livable things. But is that anywhere else in in the zoning code that would talk about that, like that we could just reference off that we don't have to recreate the wheel here?
My suggestion is to look to the decision on Kessler that was before the PSC, because that was litigated extensively. And the concern is you can't just glance at the structure right now, because inevitably people are always upgrading, and so you don't always see that from the outside looking in. And so I would refer us back to what the PSC has already litigated and see if we can't get some more direction from there. I was directly involved with that particular case, and it was a hunting cabin. It did not have potable water. It had an outdoor plumbing facility. And, that's not necessarily unusual in certain parts of even Stark County when you have some of the more hunting-based habitable structures. And so I think we need to be careful about defining it to be too urban.
And Sandra, does the PSC has since put that language in some of their restrictions, and did they define, do you know if they defined habitable then? I feel like they did not either, because it was just a generic term that they had used. But do you know anything about their definition of habitable then that came out of that case?
I think they kept it quite broad. Habitable is capable of being inhabited, and so it could get as broad as being nothing but a cold storage building, but nonetheless, it becomes sort of that hunting cabin or enclosure, no different than a tent, but still having four walls that is used during a certain season of the year. And essentially, that's what this particular structure was in that case. A hunting cabin at one point that, unbeknownst to the wind tower company, over a certain window of time, the party's son had returned from college, on his own time refurbished the particular place from the inside out, and before they knew it, wind tower up, but completely habitable structure returned to being inhabited by the son returning from college. And so, we are working usually on snapshots in time, looking at particular items, but we got to keep our black and white regulations broad enough to take into account life is still going on while we're assessing some of these decisions. And so broader terms are sometimes better than very, very narrow ones.
Especially if there's already been a court decision on it, that's what they're going to use for reference, correct?
Correctly, that's going to carry some precedence.
Would any and all wind turbines that would be placed in our county have to go through PSC approval before it would come to us?
Yeah.
So they would all be meeting all the PSC guidelines 100%. So whatever we're putting is above and beyond PSC, right? We don't have to,
Yeah.
so anything the PSC
I'm not sure that's correct.
Okay.
I don't know who's, I'm sorry, I'm
Commissioner
remote.
Sobolik.
Okay, my understanding, the ones that PSC gets involved in are only those that are going to be part of a grid network. Sort of a little differential in terms of when you look at the proposed language in the county ordinance, gets down to dealing with individual wind turbines. And so PSC doesn't necessarily regulate individual wind turbines. It regulates wind energy facilities and deals with the siting of those.
As this
so there
policy
is
states,
a
it's only for
different threshold. I'm sorry, who is?
Oh, sorry.
I didn't
so
hear
Sandra, or Ms. Kuntz, as this, our policy states like it's a certain size, that doesn't count for PSC guidance. It's only if they're going to feed the grid.
That's what PSC regulates, I believe, are those that are affecting the grid as part of a public utility. The ones within this particular proposal includes covering those individual wind turbines so that you do have more reach on a local level, whereas where it should stand.
And I'm just gonna pipe in really quick because I am a little aware. I'm aware of the PSC hearing, and
Can you turn your mic on?
yeah, Mr. Bowie was the attorney. Bowie is actually the attorney that litigated it, and he's in the audience. So if you guys, without getting too far into it, if you have questions for him, he'd probably be able to tell you much more in depth and in detail about the findings of that court.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I just got one other one. Let's go to number 5I. Due to the complexity of the different items that are named there, I think that also needs a variance as well. And that's the only other one I've had some concern on.
I'm sorry, can you repeat which section that was, sir?
It was I at page 5.
Bottom of page 5, Commissioner Kuntz, because I had the same one marked, Commissioner Richard.
And what was your proposal? I didn't hear that, I'm sorry.
It should have a variance because of the unusual circumstance it could rise by the different types of technology that is reflected in there. So a variance should be in place for that to have a better understanding what the request would be at the time.
Commissioners, I
And
believe
so
there was some
did I
language.
hear
at the
correctly, the ones you've talked about in this time frame were B, which was the 3 mile one. Now you suggested I, and what was the last one? I believe there are 3.
B, C, and I.
BC and I. Thank you.
I've been looking at quite a few different ordinances. One thing I have seen with the I is that some counties are putting a dollar amount on it, so anything over like, $25,000, which then would take out, like the direct TV antennas and things like that could be misinterpreted and make it quite a bit larger antenna or things of that nature. I'm not suggesting that, just something that I've seen, so.
Is there laws on with the Doppler radar system or station, with the airport being close by? What are the regulations for the height of these turbines to be in the pathway of the airport and with any Doppler radar stations?
We researched that, and they do have their own regulations that are protecting those units. And so I don't think we need to talk about airports because they have all their own setbacks, and they actually have to get airport approval
Okay.
within a certain mile range. So I felt like that was really well covered. Me and one other gentleman researched that, and the airport actually said, no, we're not concerned
That's
because
right.
we do have really good protection because, of course, that is a multi-million-dollar facility, and they make sure that they're not being interfered with.
That's
of
right.
course.
Sorry, I remember that now.
That I think that's okay.
Okay.
I would be in favor of adding a dollar value to that so that we don't get ourselves into a battle over some personal, obviously if it's on your house, you're already going to be protected, but who knows if there's any little weather stations or something like that. That was not the intent. It was really to protect. It was language we had found in other counties, and I assume it's to protect public. Well, if it's related to the airport in any way, that should be protected, but any public broadcasts. I don't know that this is an issue in our county, so if, I don't know either way that this is going to be, but it might be a future issue if anything else gets put up in the future. But I would be in favor of putting a dollar amount on that so that we don't get nitpicky on that.
What dollar amount do you recommend?
I'll recommend 25,000 as.
When I saw, at least one of them was from Stutzman, and there was a few other ones, it was that $25,000 range, yeah.
Is that where it kind of becomes more of a professional versus a hobby maybe or something, like it's?
I'm not sure about the rational basis behind it, but I know that when Stutzman County did their setback ordinances, they had a lot of input from the PSC and a lot of the experts, and they've been in place since like 2008 and haven't had any feedback as far as I know. I think 25,000 I think is a large enough number where you're not getting into those like small personal devices that
Sure.
Could cause some legal issues, so.
Looking at letter E on that too, Bryce, that's less restrictive than we have in some of the ordinances that Steve had put forward here. They were their main highways, so we probably should change that.
Yeah, Steve had a good recommendation that he had made a couple of years ago. Was it, Steve? You had kind of drafted these based on some issues that you had with other projects, right? And I thought they were quite good.
Yes, Commissioner Dressler. It was based on some of the comments that we had received during a couple of the projects, and thought that there are certain roads around here that these should be set back further, further from, and also the fact too that the setback in the county's ordinance from roads is actually less than what the PSC's is. So this just makes it compliant with that. However, we got to recognize we have unique places like the Enchanted Highway and, along Highway 10, Old Highway 10 and so on, where that came up during one of the hearings. So the idea was to try and keep these high structures further away from the more traveled, roads in the county.
I know when we were, when there was talk and I'd went to some of the hearings with the Brady Wind Farm, they had wanted to make sure that, like what you said, the Enchanted Highway and all those, they wanted to make sure they stayed a mile away from them on that highway,
From the actual road or from the?
from the structures.
From the center of the road, I think is how it
Yep.
was worded. And I think that's to protect a lot of future development along those highways, is to keep those highways open for, and they're already quite populated probably, but I thought he had a nice, a relevant suggestion there. So I would be open to changing E to follow Steve's suggestion.
And what is that suggestion, just in case anybody doesn't have this paperwork?
I can read it if you'd like. The setback requirement is less restrictive, and we're referring to, this is the requirement that he's referring to. It's public roads and above-ground communication electrical lines. Each wind turbine shall be set back from the nearest public road or above-ground communication and electrical lines at a distance not less than 200 feet from the center of the existing right-of-way. Steve then says, sorry, Mr. Josephson then says, the setback requirement is less restrictive than the state's requirement. So I believe that we can't do that, so we at least have to match state. Also, the county zoning ordinance restricts the height of the structures along the Enchanted Highway. Additionally, when Dickinson Wind Farm project was presented to the county commission in 2015, commissioners expressed concerns regarding the locating of turbines along major roadways. Staff recommends amending the setback to read as follows. The public roads and above-ground communication and electrical lines, each wind turbine shall be set back at least 1 mile from the following roadways: Highway 10, State Road 22, State Highway 8, State Highway 85, U.S. Interstate 94, and the Enchanted Highway. Otherwise, each wind turbine shall be set back 1.1 times the turbine height from the nearest edge of a state interstate roads, 1.1 times the turbine height plus 75 feet from the center line of any county roads or section line roads, 1.1 times the turbine height from the nearest edge of railroad right-of-ways, 1.1 times turbine height from the edge of a 115 kilovolt or higher transmission line row. And I believe that he was referring then to the state, and we have to go equal or greater to state. So what we have here is not allowable as it is written. So we do have to modify it in some way, either way.
Okay.
So he's giving us an either or scenario here.
Both scenarios.
Or both, sorry.
Yeah, the
You're
idea
right.
is that along the major roads that lead into the communities in Stark County, that the turbines be located at least a mile away. Those are the gateways to our communities. And then the other thing was that the otherwise just matches what the state, along any other roadways, that matches what the state minimum requirements are.
And I would like to propose that we would use state guidelines plus Steve's recommendation along our major highways as written.
I'll second that or agree.
Also, Steve had a comment, SJ16 on that same page. Is the setback based upon the rotor diameter or the turbine height? And it was F. It was always turbine height that we were always trying to reference the same thing throughout these, and so turbine height was our intention. If the word height was missing, that is a adequate addition that you have there in red. That's perfect. That's what we intended as a subcommittee. But that's how all these were written, as we wanted everything to be consistently defined by height so that there wasn't any confusion based on. You see a lot of counties flip-flopping back and forth between rotor height, rotor diameter, and turbine height, which is the tip of the blade. It's the tallest point of, so it's, if if the blade is extended all the way vertical, it would be the tip of that blade to the ground. And we defined that we defined it, right, Steve, in our definitions pages. We haven't gotten there yet, but that was what our intention was, is to be consistent on that measurement.
Can you address this?
So we're
Page 2.
page 2, if you guys want to look at that. We went a little bit around, Steve and I and Dustin Stuber, about this question. Yours is different than mine. Oh, okay. G, which.
No, F.
Oh, sorry, F. Be registered with the North Dakota Secretary of State. That was something that was dug up out of another state. And we felt like it was prudent just because and maybe it's completely up to this board, but maybe it's overkill. Steve thought they had to go above and beyond this anyway, but just so that they were legally registered with the state and so we were trying to avoid shell companies doing undue things to people without being a proper company and being registered with the state. What do you think about that, Amanda? Is that here nor there? I don't know.
I would really have to do a little bit more research on it. Steve, do you have a?
All I'm going to say is no other applicant for a conditional use permit is required to be registered with the state of North Dakota.
Steve, can you clarify that? No other applicant for conditional use permit in Stark County or?
In Stark County, in the Stark County zoning ordinance, that's not a requirement. I haven't seen it as a requirement for any other conditional use permits.
And so we were just trying to prevent bad actors from coming in with without proper registration. It's probably part of the bonding process. I don't know how that works, but I really don't have a strong opinion on that.
So, Mr. Josephson, somebody that comes in with a company in the oil field, or someone that comes in with a company for roofing or anything else, are they required to be registered with the state of North Dakota to do work in Stark County in case they didn't do a sufficient job and they have to go back to that company?
We're now wandering into the realm of building permits, and that's something I don't know that much about, except, and I wish Natalie was here or someone like that, but this is a question for the building department, because I think all building permits are registered with the state of North Dakota, but those are builders, and that's approved administratively. I'm talking about the things in the zoning ordinance where you would require a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
So that's the distinction.
Yeah. I guess what I was getting at that I didn't mean to go over to the building side. I just think that as a company, whoever comes into Stark County to do work should be registered with the state.
Dustin Stuber, who was with the oil field, has a lot of information with what oil companies are subject to, said that as an oil, if you're wanting to place a pad in a well, you had to be registered with the state of North Dakota. So that's where we got our information from. And we were trying to make it equitable between energy companies. Like if this applies to oil and gas, it should apply to other energy uses. Again, I'm sure down in the process they might have to do this anyway. We really weren't 100% sure about that.
No, I don't feel that strongly about it. It's just a matter of are you going to, if somebody says, well, for this conditional use permit, we're required to register with the state of North Dakota, and they'll say, well, look through here, like say for example, someone wants to do a kennel, you're not requiring them to register with the state of North. That's the only thing I'm saying is I haven't seen any other conditional use permit requirements where it says the applicant has to register with the state of North Dakota. Having said that, there's certainly a difference between an energy company and somebody who wants to put a kennel on their farm. So
Yeah.
I don't feel strongly about this, because I think that, number one, whoever does this is gonna have the wherewithal to do it. And number two, if they're gonna do business, they're probably gonna need to do this, but I can't, that may be one of those things we may need to do a little more research on, but I don't think it's gonna break anything, so.
I guess in my feeling, I think anybody that does work in North Dakota with energy companies, with oil and gas that have to do with this is also energy. I think they should be registered with the state, is my opinion. And maybe, Amanda, you can look into that. I mean, for bonding purposes, insurance purposes, everything like that, just to make sure the resident is protected and they can't get through a loophole of the fact that they're not registered with the state. And on G, on page 2, I think that is very important with the security bond, that we had put that in place. Downwards F, and then it says E, and then kind of, it's in blue where it says EG. You have that? Okay.
What page are you?
On 2.
And it's off to the side or right in
No, it's right on the bottom.
Oh, got it. Sorry.
Just can't see the color differences.
Yeah.
Commissioner, my only comment on that is during the construction phase, it is required for somebody to get a surety bond, of course, but to put in an application's not a promise to do anything. An application is just asking the county, we want to go through this process. We may or may not get approved. I'm trying to figure out why a bond would be required at the application process instead of at the construction process.
Can we change our language to just at this level say at start of construction a bond must be? Did we just word this badly? Is what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying that, or you can put it elsewhere in the ordinance.
Put it later.
I'm just saying that,
Yeah.
if,
I don't think we didn't intend for it to be at the start of the application. It was at the start of construction, of
Yes.
course.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's,
So we could pull it from that section and
yeah.
do you have documents to show the bonding, like what other counties are doing? Or the comparative numbers for that?
I did not have anything comparative from other counties, but we did just simply look at what was in place at the state level, and then it is going up, but we also just felt like it was extremely insufficient, and that at some point the landowner is going to be responsible for removing that turbine just because the sheer cost is. And I'm open to saying, I would love to make it fluid and tie it to something like, hey, go get 3 bids on what it costs to remove this, and make sure as you're doing your bonding updates, like there's other grain, like I'm in the grain industry and we have to get a new bond every year, and it goes up based on various different variables. And so I would like to make it a little bit more fluid so that we don't have to amend it every 5 years when the cost of decommissioning changes. And I feel like that's just something that should naturally apply to anything that either, I know oil and gas is going through this as well, and they've definitely had a lot more time to structure some better language there for reclamation. But currently there's a big hole at the state level that dictates what happens to these turbines after they're done with their useful life. And unfortunately, I would like to open this up to comment and see if anyone here has some experience with that. But I do know that it seems to be the burden is back on the landowner. And I know the landowners that sign up for this are not aware that in 30 years, when the useful life is completed and these companies decide to fold up shop and go, because they're all very small shell companies without assets besides these turbines, that the turbines make up their portfolio. And so when they close shop, so does the liability. So the bonding is all that's left. And so whose responsibility now is that once that bond is used up and it's only 20% of the cost or 10% of the cost of removing that turbine? I just feel like we're going to have a really bad situation. And I don't want to see that happen here.
Sure,
If it
and you
can
know,
be.
one comment we talked about earlier was we'll probably see more turbines in smaller areas, you know, not large fields of them anymore. It'll be, you know, smaller.
Right.
And so in that sense, it's likely not a shell company. It's likely a company that, and so I don't know if there is some ways to, you know,
True.
if they've got established brick and mortar in there, you know, that have a lot more, there probably is.
Well, and if they
want to be a
are-
responsible landowner as just
Yeah.
much as you and I do want to be.
I feel like if they are an established company with brick and mortar, they're going to get these bonds relatively reasonably and cheaply. If they're not, that's when they do become expensive, but that's also when the risk goes up. So in that regard, I don't think it would be a huge burden on those companies that we probably will see to get proper bonding that would account for removing them again. You know, and if they end up wanting to take them down themselves and they don't end up leaving, or they're going to refurbish or do whatever, then of course, wonderful. That would be the hope, that all of the companies that put them up eventually take them down. But I'm afraid a lot of that's simply not the case. So
Mr. Chairman, doesn't it cover it under B, though? It states right here, all bond amounts must be adjusted on a biannual basis to account for U.S. inflation index. So you already got that built in there.
yeah, we kind of
So
do.
if you leave the
And-
language alone, you should be covered.
yeah.
Pull the amount, or that it can be, since it can be adjusted.
We do have an amount there though too. So we start with something, but we would like to make it fluid, just so it keeps up
So
with the
you
cost of
want, you want to
building.
delete the 650 and go off of a established inflationary value, something like what you were
Well,
talking
you have
about?
to start with something though. Either start with something or just establish a basis for what are you starting with that you're inflating.
That's true.
You know, like, so what do we start with? Do we have a concrete number, or do we make them get, it would be much more extensive. So this is more simple. If the state would have a monitor on this, that they would do something on their own, we'd have less to babysit over the years. But this is the most simple way we could think of it and put it. If anyone else has suggestions, it's complicated, that's for sure.
You know, like to take in, not to interrupt, but, you know, to take in the fact of the bonds that there is out there right now for the Brady, that wouldn't even maybe remove a blade. They were the bond was very, very undervalued. And, you know, and I'm worried about those landowners in the future when those wind turbines do have to be removed. Because I believe the bond is something around 25,000.
And that might be something at a commission level that you guys have to dig into in another section or another, in order to regulate that going forward with any old ones too. I do feel like that, like I said, it ever evolves in every other industry, like to protect farmers, to protect, like we have to apply each year on a grain bond, and it's to protect farmers from companies going bankrupt. And so I just want the same kind of protection for these landowners.
Mr. Chairman, I think you had their solution right there. Let's just leave it in there. The county commission can look into it a little further. If they feel that number needs a change, they can make the change at their meeting.
Sure.
Mr. Richard, the question I have, if we put it in the code, can you, as a commission, go and override that? If it's too low, if it would be too low in this code? if we'd adopted at 650,
Yes,
can you as the commission then come and override that?
yes,
At a la-
Yes, they can.
yes, we can.
Okay,
And
I just want to make sure
they
that,
can change anything we do. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's the minimum. So I just pulled it up on the Department of Interior Renewable Energy Bonding, and the BLMs and minimums, just so you guys have a reference point. Bond amount is 2,000 per wind energy test site and 10,000 per wind turbine. So they're very low.
Yeah, they are.
Well, when we did our research, we used numbers that were 5 years old, and I think it was over $1 million that they had to pay. And then it was like a study done by, I believe it was Next Era. Some maybe Dean said that at his, but it was very, very high. And we're like, oh, this is, and so we compromised down a bit.
And I
But,
think there
yeah.
was an article in the newspaper. I think it was the Bismarck Tribune or something. And it was like over $1 million.
Yeah. So we did feel like we being gracious in that, but it's just a lot, especially now with the cost of labor. It just, a lot of companies say, well, there's the scrap value, and absolutely there's scrap value, but do you know what you have to do to get that value? You have to interject mass quantities of labor and cut that. And I mean, from what I've been told, that steel is almost impossible to cut. And so nobody wants to do that job. And so it almost becomes like a complete moot point, because in order to get it to the point where you can get value for it, you almost have to add more value than you get back, depending on the cost of steel or the price of scrap steel. So it can't really be figured in too hard, but that's what a lot of these companies do, is they figure in the weight of the turbine and then the scrap price. Well, that's not apples to apples. You have to interject a lot of dollars to get to that point. So that's why I think that's why it keeps getting rolled over, is because of this amazing scrap price. But then there's also the issue of disposing of the blades. That's a big problem too.
Mr. Chair, we just got done disposing blades. They're not recyclable.
No.
You gotta bury them, and they're about $250 a ton to bury them darn things after you cut them up and handle them.
Yeah.
So,
So it's not super surprising that you're talking $1 million. It's just not surprising. What is surprising is how nobody is really addressing it.
And I believe that's why some of them are just left up in different states and they're just falling over because of the amount it takes to take them down and the fact they cannot find anywhere to dig the holes to bury them.
So if we're happy with what we've talked about, do all of what you see in red with the highlighted blue is kind of what Steve has had some comments on. If there's any other comments we want to address on Steve's comments, I think that would be prudent now. I believe we've gotten to most of them.
I'd like to see if the state's attorney has any comments on some of the stuff in red.
before we, Amanda, before we go there, I guess I'd like to have Deneen address on page 7, the wind energy facility, wind turbine siting permits not transferable. And I'm looking at Steve's comment, typically a conditional permit needs to come back for reapplication. I guess I better turn this thing. Reapplication if expansion or another major change to use is proposed. A change in name or ownership does not represent an expansion or change in use. And as I read it, if Company A sells to Company B, they have to go through the whole process all over that Company A started with.
Let's see if I can summarize this. I believe some of the intention here was so that the county was aware that there was a new applicant so that bonding could be addressed. If we want to word this better, it would just come back before the county for approval of that transfer of that permit. And then it's at that time that the county could say yes. And I don't is it worded bad? I don't necessarily think they wanted them to reapply altogether, but just transfer the permit, and maybe, is that worded badly?
Reapply for a siting.
If I may interrupt, my suggestion would be to keep the language and indicate that where it says where it's are not transferable without written consent of the county. And then you could almost delete the rest of it, because then they'd have to come back to the county, get that approval, and then bonding could be addressed and go from there. Or whether you want to address that additional parameters that they'll have to modify, I think that can be defined when they actually come back before the county.
And then if we're gonna just change it like that, could we change it to a positive wording that they are transferable with approval of the county? Just because there's just a lot of heavy language here, and so like making it that it sounds like we're trying to work with them. We want you to transfer it to another company, not let it be decommissioned and then we have to use the bond money to do all this. We want to push you to making a good business decision.
Well, you can. Here's the deal with that type of language. The risk is where the burden will lie. And so when you put it in a positive like that, then they have the right to transfer, as opposed to if you put it in the negative where it's not transferable without, then the authority is more easily grounded with the county to say no, and broader in terms of ability to say no, because you haven't already gave them a right by having it in the positive. Does that make sense? So it's really a risk issue or an authority issue for how much you want to retain that with the county and put the burden on the applicant, or whether the county is going to be at the mercy of having to establish a reason why it will say no. It's a burden question.
And I believe
Does that make sense?
I understand that, yes.
and the intent here was so that the county was aware that there is a new owner, and they would have the opportunity to explain their, I guess, their burdens of having that and how often you need to reapply. It was just an opportunity for the county to be made aware of a change. And at that time, then they would be able to address any issues that they might have, or recommendations as far as reminding them what it is that they're duty bound to follow. So that was the intent.
One suggestion in just addressing that concern about tone of the language, you could certainly draft it as may be transferable upon written approval of the county. Then you kind of keep it neutral.
And then we just delete the rest of that language.
I don't think there's the one portion in there it says within 30 days of such change. You're going to want to put a timeline on there so they're not coming in the day before and asking for permission.
Ms. Kuntz, what did you say on that? May be transferable what?
Upon written approval of the county.
Thank you.
Within 30 days of such change.
You're going to want to define whether that's 30 days in advance of a change of ownership or after.
point.
I think you have that language in there already, don't you? Within 30 days of such change of ownership.
It should be within 30 days prior to such change in ownership.
So there was language struck out on the bottom that starts within 30 days. Maybe we keep that language and just add the word prior to 30 days prior to such change.
So on the part where it says within 30 days, we just put prior of such change in ownership? Okay.
And then we can keep the rest of that language in there. That seems prudent. If everyone's in agreement on that.
On page 8, it's a continuance of letter E, penalty for failure to submit bond. On page 8, it's I think it goes penalty up to $2,000 for each day the bond is out of compliance. And I like what Mr. Josephson wrote in there, that if that figure is put down, that really ties the hands of the county commission. If they want to set that penalty higher, with it being in the code, they got their hands tied. They can't adjust that. So I'm wondering if that shouldn't be worded to amount to be determined by the county commission.
Do we want to put some number in there just so they know and they understand that? Or do we not want to?
Can we put a recommendation, Steve, and then say or say or by, so that if they decide to do something different, they don't have to amend?
Or you could say a minimum of.
I would suggest for both B, the amount of the actual bond, and then were we looking at E on the penalty, I would identify a minimum amount that provides notice to the person that may be violating, and then qualify it with, so for example, B would say a bond shall be in the minimum amount of $650,000 per wind turbine or as otherwise set by the commission, the county commission. And then E would read similarly with the county may assess an administrative penalty of a minimum of $2,000 each day the bond is out of compliance, or such amount is determined by the commission. It's better in terms of enforcement if you have a minimum amount.
And that's good, because if you do change the amount, the way it's written now, if you put that in the zoning ordinance and you decide to up the amount or reduce it, you have to come back and come through the amendment process with a public hearing. So that way that gives some you don't have to do that if you put down a minimum or some other amount to be determined.
Okay.
And I agree with Ms. Quince. That was one of the notes I had on my markup here, was to adjust some of that language to put a minimum amount, so they know there's a baseline and then it can go up from there.
So are we all comfortable with the numbers that we have as the minimum, or does anyone want to change that? I guess that's all we'd have to decide then, and then they can add that language. That would be, I think, a good compromise.
I'm comfortable with the number.
Okay.
How about,
You go back to page 2 of the public hearing. I got an issue with the 5 mile thing with our staff having to send out. I think what Steve recommends there is that the applicant should be responsible for the mailing out, because I don't know how he was a part-time employee, and I don't know how in that he'd comply with that in 45 days.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good suggestion by Steve as well. I'm 100%. I think that's a wonderful way to do it.
yep,
Put the burden entirely on the applicant. They have
Yes.
to
Yeah.
they have to sign an affidavit saying, yes, we sent all this out.
yes.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a really nice way to do it.
And is 5 miles, like, is that what we're seeing in other ordinances, or where did we come up with 5 miles again?
It was based on the meetings that we had. We had a lot of input and complaints from the folks that, and this is just for, it's not for anything else besides wind turbines, but just because of their amount of impact, people were heatedly upset that they were not notified, and some of them would, like, in past projects that were created or even not created, that was one of the biggest complaints, is that, like, this thing is right beside me almost, and and it has a big impact on me and my view shed and everything else, and they said they don't even know about it. And so 5 miles we felt was prudent, because it's really going to be a rare situation that this is going to even occur. And we just felt like it's the duty of the county to let people know of something that, because there is impacts to people's health within 5 miles, and we felt that it doesn't hurt anyone to let them know that this is happening. I mean, it is public, it's in the paper. It's just that the biggest issue is people, there's no great communication method, and a lot of people don't get the paper. And so it just seemed like the burden always lied with the residents to know what's happening right beside them, just based on a very small news article. And I felt like this is something we can easily do. And I don't see the harm in letting people be informed. And I felt like it would give a lot of burden relief to the county, so that there's not citizens upset that they just didn't know about these things. And I do feel like a lot of what we're doing today is going to make them more part of the project already. But I think this really covers our burden as far as informing the public. And I think that's the least we can do is let them know. I just feel like it's the right thing to do, to let people know what's happening around them. And like I said, this is going to be a rare situation. I don't feel like it's going to happen even once a year, so.
And with the 5 miles, that we chose, I mean, that for what will be going up and the money being spent, that is just a very, very small amount of money, but yet it's huge to, the residents of Stark County, that they know what's going on. And I believe that wasn't that in another county also? Or was that not, or was it?
I don't remember
Okay.
if there was any historical reference there.
Commissioners, can I bring up a couple more comments of mine just to throw out at you? Okay, first of all, on the bottom of page 2, when the ordinance was adopted, it said, if the Planning and Zoning Commission finds the applicant for the wind energy facility siting permit has satisfied all applicable requirements, it shall recommend approval. It was changed to may. Staff's recommendation is just to strike that paragraph in its entirety, because this is a conditional use permit. So in addition to meeting any technical things that are in this chapter, it's got to meet all of the other things that go along with a conditional use permit. That's when you start getting into issues of compatibility, of compatibility, and you can see those criteria that are addressed by everybody who goes through the conditional use permit. I don't know why that was why that was in there. I think it's probably, maybe it was, what, I'm not going to speculate on that. But anything where it says may or shall, I would just, as a conditional use permit, you've got to consider all the other criteria for a conditional use permit in addition to any of the technical things that are in this chapter. So I would just strike that entire paragraph out of there.
Mr. Chairman, I concur also with that.
Okay. There was another thing under the demonstration of compliance. Also, in addition to the things that were recommended for that, also that they show that they are also meeting the intents of the conditional use, the conditions of the conditional use permit too. And I think, where did I have that? There we go. SJ. Seven, well, yeah.
Where was that, Ms. Walla?
I thought I had something in there that said that they've got to meet, they've got to meet whatever is in addition to everything else, they've got to meet what's in the conditions of the conditional use permit.
Comment 7 and 8.
Mm-hmm. Well, 8 is different. 8's been taken care of.
I believe the language at the bottom of page 2 is statutory. The intent is to design a time frame within which planning and zoning must address the application. It's not a matter of forcing approval, it's a matter of processing the application.
Okay, the issue I have is with the word it.
Correct.
With the thing of
I don't disagree
approval.
with taking it out because it is statutory.
Okay.
It's already covered.
Sandy, do you know where that statute is?
Yeah, where is that?
That is the main language in the planning and zoning statute under, I believe that language, let me find that. I don't have that right in front of me, but I believe that language is statutory under your zoning provisions.
I know it's statutory when it comes to animal farm, animal feeding operations. I know that the legislature put that into 1130. I think it's 1133 a few years ago. I'm not aware that any other conditional use permit has to be decided within a 60-day period. We can check that.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to taking it out, but I think that's where it came from.
How's about if it turns out it's not statutory?
Well, I think we take it out either way. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Well, doesn't that when it says within 60 days, I know we had made amendment or to that, so where certain companies couldn't just keep on taking away and extending their permit over and over and over and over?
Well, we now have the
different
continuance language.
Right.
We now have the continuance language, so that would cover that.
Is that everything you wanted to cover, Steve, or?
On the first page, there was something in here that said principal or accessory uses. A different existing use, or the current language is a different existing use or an existing structure on the same parcel shall, or proposed to be may, shall not preclude the installation of a wind energy facility or part of any such facility on such parcel. And again, I don't understand why that's in there. I just as soon strike that. Strike that too. It talks about nonconformities, and there's actually a part in the code that actually covers nonconformities. Because the way I read this is if there's an existing structure on the same parcel, it's not going to, if a different type of use on there, it's not going to preclude the installation of a wind energy facility. And again, that gets back to the whole thing of having a conditional use permit and compatibility and so on. If the idea of this, the setbacks is to protect existing structures that are already on a property or adjacent or nearby, I don't understand. I guess I don't understand why that's in there, and I would just as soon see it struck. You know, also, I mean, if it's on the same piece of property as the turbine is going, then that must mean the property owner had consented to it. So I don't understand why that's in there, but that's part of why we go through and do code amendments, is to clean stuff like that up. Under general requirements for wind energy facilities, D on page 3, I would like to restore it. In addition, the committee had recommended putting in the state language about, and it's actually from the administrative code, not the century code. But I would recommend putting in there, restoring the stuff about not to be artificially lighted except to the extent required by the FAA or other applicable authorities. In addition to the language that's in the administrative code about installing the lights that, installing those lights that are supposed to react when aircraft fly over them.
And what did you want to do on that?
I want to restore, there was language crossed out that said not be artificially lighted except to the extent required by the FAA or other applicable authority. I'd like to restore that language.
The comments on page 4,
Yeah.
SJ9.
Yeah, and we had originally had that language in there, and then we took it out just because we referenced the statute, and we thought it was covered then. But it doesn't hurt to leave it in either.
Yeah.
We just thought we were being redundant, so we made it up and then we took it back out. So that
Okay.
was what that was about. So yeah, it's totally fine to leave it in there.
I think y'all have gone through this, and I think you've covered just about everything, all the changes. But if I inadvertently left out in 6.19.4 that they have to show that it also meets the conditions of the conditional use permit, then I'd like to have that language in there too. So they're not just that in the compliance report, in addition to the other things that are in there, that they're actually meeting what was in the conditional use permit as approved by the county commission.
Okay, now to summarize all these things in a motion.
Oh, boy. Well,
If-
Oh, right, yeah.
We should have some public input on what
You
we
have something
discussed.
else?
Yeah, I do. In my research and looking at things, I was at the North Dakota Public Service Commission site. And I happened to come across, I have no idea how I did it, but I came across a blank, what do they call it on the front page here? It's just a blank draft model zoning ordinances that they have for wind turbines. And as I was reading through that and comparing it to what we have here, there was a couple of things that stuck out to me that we don't have, and maybe we should consider adding it into this. One is a biological resource survey. Unless and I'm reading this word for word the way it's on their blank document. Unless the project is under the purview of the North Dakota Public Service Commission, the applicant in consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ecological Services Office, and the North Dakota Department of Game and Fish shall for the project site conduct a pre-construction inventory of existing wildlife management areas, scientific and natural areas, recreation areas, native prairies, forests, wetlands, and other biologically sensitive areas and wildlife resources, particularly birds and bats within the site, and assess the presence of state-listed or federally listed or threatened species or other protected species such as migratory birds. The results of that survey shall be submitted to the county planner, USFWS, and North NDGF. They talk about that in there, and we've heard some comments about the wildlife already. So I wonder if it's a proposal, if it's a project that comes through that's not going on the grid, if this is something that we should include in our code. They also talked about archaeological resource survey consultation in this sample blank deal. So, I happened to find it last night about 10:30 at night. And then I struggled finding it again today before the meeting so that I could come and bring it and share it with you folks, because there were some things in there that caught my attention that were not in ours. So maybe we need some, is the wording right? I don't know. But at least there is some stuff there that gives us some more thought processes.
Mr. Chairman, is that something that we could address in a specific by specific situation under conditional use where we would require them to have an environmental study at that time?
That's a good question that I'm gonna defer back over to our county planner, because he knows how this stuff works better than I do.
Boy, I would love to see that language, commissioners, but I think I'd have to go back and look at it, but I think Dunn County also requires a similar list
Yeah.
as the one that you spoke of. I remember going through that and being impressed by that, by that list. So I believe Dunn County, when they revised their ordinance, included all of that. Yeah, I believe that. I'd have to look at it, but I believe that they had all of that. And along with Commissioner Freilich's suggestion, I also wanted to put in as part of the application requirement, and it's on page 1, that an applicant be required to submit a written statement addressing how the proposed wind energy facility is consistent with the comprehensive plan as well as the purpose of the zoning ordinance. And then they'd be required to submit a written summary of how the proposed wind energy facility meets the state of North Dakota's energy conversion facility siting criteria. At a minimum, it would address the facility is not located in an exclusion area, it's not located in an avoidance area, and it meets the state's minimum selection criteria.
And that was asking for just a comprehensive study?
Well, that they include number one, how they're consistent with the zoning ordinance and also the county's comprehensive plan, as well as are they going to meet the minimums in the PSC's requirements? And we've asked, I know with Brady Wind Farm, we asked for that. And I think there have been others where we've actually asked them, if you need a state permit, show us that you're going to meet at a minimum. You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but at least address this, because.
And on that, I think that we should, when we address it, to say exactly where we want them to go and how we want the study done, so then it's not so broad. That they go through game and fish, and they do that, because I agree with Mr. Freilich.
Where would this be put into the code? Like, where would you recommend placing?
I'd say as part of the application.
Okay, we'll.
Yeah, they come with it
definitely
up front.
Take your recommendations on that, because it sounds typical for a large wind farm from what or if you're on the grid, it sounds like it's
It's gonna be
required.
required, the way I
So,
read it, but if it's not
I would say
going-
we continue with their language on both types. We've been saying a wind turbine is a wind turbine, whether it's on the grid or not. It still has the same exact effect on wildlife.
Yes.
The wildlife doesn't know that it's not on the grid. So I would say that's completely relevant to follow state guidelines on that.
And at one point in time, we had talked about the game and fish survey. Was that anything?
Yeah, that's
Maybe
what I
we
was
should
gonna
almost
jump into next.
review the things we've talked about, because we've talked about so many things now, and I'm kind of at a loss of what we've all gone through.
I'd like to know the current requirement for setbacks from wetlands. Do you know, Steve?
I don't know what,
You know, I
mean
know
the
they
state's requirements, I
have
don't
to stay away
have
from
them.
wetlands. I just don't know. What we've written in is 2.5 times the turbine height. I'd like to ask some of my,
I think Commissioner Dressler, you made the point of saying that maybe some of those water bodies that were portrayed are, they're actually dried streams, or they're,
I don't know how the state treats those at all, because yeah, some of them are very small, and we didn't see that originally on the wetland survey. So what are they defining as a wetland at the state level, and is that what we just wanna just leave the state level then?
Is it the state, or is it actually going
Or is it
back
game
to-
and fish?
Well, or a farm service agency,
Right.
or
their definitions.
Maybe
what
we
the
don't have enough
PSC
information to
I'm
make a
sorry.
recommendation on this.
or
I
what the
don't-
public
stay away
service,
from
what the
that.
Public Service Commission looks at.
Well, and in the Public Service Commission recommended, this form that, Mr. Freilich had found, it just says unless the project is under the purview of the NDPSC, the applicant in consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, some other letters here for the project, conduct a pre-constructory inventory. But it doesn't say how far, it doesn't, like, there's no guideline to it, it's just saying to do that.
It does in this.
In the what? What are you pointing?
In the 69 page.
Oh,
I hate to intervene.
So,
I know I'm not supposed to talk.
Mr. Chair, why don't we just leave the authority with the county? You get the game and fish involved, you open up a whole new can of worms of regulations and input from outside the area, shall we say.
But at the beginning of it, when they do that, we don't have put it in our code, but when they have to go through game and fish to do it.
They'll have to address that, especially if you could require environmental study.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll just have to make sure that is noted when they do the study through to get the CUP, that they have to do that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is Sandy Kuntz. I've just been spamming you all with some of the references that we've been talking about, the game and fish study, Mr. Freilich's reference to the Public Service Commission, sample environmental studies ordinances. So look for those in your emails.
Okay.
Got it. So our proposal is to take out D, if everyone's in agreement with that, and we can.
Which page is that on?
We can listen to the public on that as well. I know there might be some other weigh-ins on that. I just don't know.
Which page on D? Where?
Yeah, is that what we're saying here, is just to strike D, or do we want to change the level of the turbine height to just be smaller? 5. If anyone has other ideas, I would like to hear them.
And on the wetlands and, and yes, when we go through the, when we can require them, for game and fish. We just have to realize that some wetlands on some years are dry and some wetlands some years are.
Our whole concept was we were trying to define wetlands, and we
Yep.
felt like this was a nice way to define that. But then when you look at that map, you're like, oh gosh, that's
Yep.
way more than we intended.
Yeah.
Like we intended the obvious rivers, and I know there is already a setback for rivers and
Yep.
various things. So I think we might be being redundant. I don't know that we intended I didn't intend
So
it to
your
be quite
proposal is
so.
to strike it out of there, correct? I concur with you.
So strike. And I guess until further, I don't know, on the page 2 on the bottom, with it being statutory, I think we should look into that and make sure wherever it is in our code, instead of just striking it immediately, I think we should look into that a little bit.
I've got a note. I've got a note on that.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps the comment that I would make, and I don't know how Amanda feels about this, if any recommendation you make today, it's going to do a fair amount of rewriting. And I don't know that we can get something, if the idea is to make a recommendation to the county commission for its upcoming meeting, you know, I think we're going to need a little more time than that to prepare something, because the meeting is what, it's 3 days, 4 days away. So
Can we make any action today for 2 meetings away at the county level? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, we
Well, if we're gonna have to wait the month, do we not want to look at it all in its entirety?
Sure.
And
Yeah, that's
because
fine.
now we are, I mean, we are making some edits to it, and so I feel like for everyone to make sure that they're on board with it, you know, we've talked about a lot of things today, so to read through it again and look at it in its entirety, actually written, not just kind of what we each kind of thought we recommended to be put in there today.
Sure, that's.
And so I would motion that we,
Should we
with the
listen
edits.
to the
I think we
public
should
first?
listen.
Oh, listen,
Maybe
thank you.
just quickly,
Yep.
at least, yeah.
yeah, I'm sure it's going to take Amanda and myself to go through this. Plus, we would like all the commissioners to look at it because, you know, hearing things and intents of things, sometimes people hear them differently or whatever. So
And I think the committee members would also like, you know, to get the drafts and the input on it also.
We'd also like to get the public input here.
Yeah,
Yep.
if we
yeah,
could.
if we could do that, that would be
Can we
great.
take 5 minutes?
Oh, yeah, could we take a quick,
Yeah,
like you
See,
said?
I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
we'll take a 5-minute break here. from the public on the proposal changes or the modifications we made?
May it, I guess, please the commission. I'm Lynn Bowie. I was the attorney on the Kessler case, and I can answer the questions that you may have on that. But I will mention to you, if we turn to page 5, the reason on the top of page 5, occupied has been crossed out, is because the statute had required the company that was building all of these wind towers, required them to list any unoccupied or occupied houses. And so what they did is they decided that one house was, in their view, unoccupied. So they didn't bother to tell the PSC about that being a structure, didn't have it on the map, and they put the wind tower 1,100 feet from it. And the person was not a participating landowner because they put it right on inside the section line of his neighbor's property. So they just said, oh, well, that person's out of luck. So in regards to page 5 and the definition, and you asked what is the definition, what did the PSC do? First of all, it wasn't a case. It was a complaint filed, and the PSC then made a decision on it. They determined and ruled that the house at issue was indeed occupied. And I would strongly suggest that the language you want to use instead of habitable, which I think has the same problem as occupied, because there's somebody living in it there or not, it should be instead capable of habitation, or on the comment SJ11, you would want to add in structure instead of used, capable to be used. And so let me explain why that's so important. The PSC had a real problem. It wasn't just a hunting cabin. It was used as a residence. People lived there, in-laws, others who came to visit. They used it for Super Bowl games, other different things. It had water. It had heat. It was open and heated the entire year. But that particular person who was living in it was at college during the fall and came back only during the summer. So the problem the PSC had is, well, if I have a house and I sometimes use it either for anybody or as a second home, if it's capable of being used on a day-to-day basis, then it should be considered, we shouldn't be concerned about whether it's occupied or not. Is it capable of being, or is it habitable or capable of being used as a residence? And that would be the real issue, because some people have homes where they don't use them all the time, day to day. So I would get rid of any reference to day to day, and I would suggest that the best way to handle this is that it's just capable of habitation, either full-time or seasonal, whichever way you want to put it. But if it's capable of being used as a home all year round, then it doesn't matter if someone's in it or not. That's what the PSC basically decided in this case. So when they were ordered to take it down, according to the brief submitted by Minnesota Power, it was going to cost them anywhere from $2 to $4 million to take it down. So, and that's what they had to do. So I don't know if you have any other questions in regards to that particular case. I'm just looking. There is also, and I'd be glad to assist or work with your planner and Ms. Engelstead if you have any questions as to some of the definitions that the PSC found helpful in regards to their changes that they're going to be making. And I'd be glad to mention and go over any of those with, again, your state's attorney or the planner if you want any of my input as to the languages they used. But the definition is important. The other place they looked is there is a definition in the criminal statutes as to a residence for burglary, and it's very similar. It says if some, it doesn't matter if someone's living in it, if you break into a house that is capable of being lived in, it's burglary. So there are some definitions that can be used, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions of the state's attorney or the planner when you ever get to it. So I don't know if anyone has any questions regarding the Kessler case or not, but that's the background of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So with that Kessler case, then that was totally up to the wind energy company to have to remove that.
They were ordered. They had no choice. They were ordered to move it, and They were ordered to comply with the original order of the PSC, which was there would be no wind towers would be within 1,400 feet of an occupied residence. The company tried to claim it was an unoccupied, and the PSA said, no, you're wrong. It was occupied. You screwed up by putting it there. Take it down.
And it's that cost
Down.
was $2 to $4 million.
According to their briefs they submitted, I don't know what the actual cost was, but according to the brief they submitted trying to get out of having to take it down, they told the PSC it's going to cost us $2 to $4 million to take it down, and that might have included and put it back up at another location.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
Thank you. Any other comment from the public? Any other comment from the public? Anybody on the phone, any comment?
You know, talking to Dean Berwick, and we were talking about the bond issue, and a lot of people thinking it's high and stuff. What we just found out, or what I just found out, was the Tatanka case. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it down there by Hettinger. The PSC was looking at it, they said, hey, they blamed it on the impact it would have on packing the ground for the farmer or rancher. What it came down to is, as we read the article, it basically came down to Julie Fedorchuk herself was worried that the company was going to go bankrupt. So what I'm getting at is, because I know you guys think the price probably was pretty high, but that is what it's costing. And that article I gave Deneen there, what it is just to get the turbine down and haul it away. It's not to reclaim anything. And that was over $675,000. And that was from Blattner Energy to Next Era, who has the Brady project. So it's kind of close. You know, it wasn't exactly the Brady project, but they're talking about the same turbine. So with the price we came up with, and after I seen the deal with the PSC, allowing them to now just pull these turbines over, because really what the thing is it's the money. It's all about the money. And like I said in the article, it's talking about she's worried about this company, Tatanka, going bankrupt. So she's finding a way to help them out. Well, that was it. So I think the bond issue is a huge thing, because a lot of people are finding that through, like you were talking as far as the transferring, selling one company selling to another. In that transition, they are finding that a lot of things are left out. So it is important that everything has got to be done through you guys. You know, if they're going to sell it to somebody else or whatever they're going to do, if they're going to transfer ownership, all this stuff's got to be checked out, because we're finding that they're letting it slide. And all of a sudden, we don't have a bond on that. We never did have a bond. We weren't required to have a bond. So that stuff's really important to look at. And I think and the research we're doing, the other one is the infrasound. And I know you don't like the setback of 3 miles. Infrasound is very strong for 12 and a half. And I sent just about everybody on the commission and the P&Z letters of this stuff, explaining the infrasound, where it's coming, who's all looking at that. And every country's looking at it. Finland just changed theirs. They were like 2 miles. Now they're looking at 9 miles because of the health of the people. And Germany's doing the same thing, which Germany is huge in wind turbines. They're finding out also. They want to go 15 kilometers away. You know, you're looking at 9 miles. So when I asked for 3, I actually asked for 5. And we brought it down to 3, which I thought was a huge compromise. I do not think we can go any lower than 2 on this. And it's going to affect a lot of people. Since we're so close to a town with the amount of people we have here, and infrasound can travel 12 miles, anybody, I mean, if there's turbines set out around here with 2-3 miles, it's going through the whole city of Dickinson. If you got people with metal in their head, that's a big deal. I mean, like hearing or something like that, this really wrecks them. Same with their stomach. So the research that we did backs all this stuff up by numerous. I mean, you're talking research institutes, you're talking about engineering, everything. We checked it all. So I think the 2 miles has got to stay. We cannot go any less than 2 miles from, well, like Mr. Bowie was talking about, how you're calling it an occupied or an occupied site. You know, you got to stay at least 2 miles away. So and the other thing is, when you're talking about letters and going the 5 miles, I was kind of in charge of that too. And what I'm finding out is a certain company within about 9-10 months ago applied for a permit. The only place it wasn't put was the Dickinson Press. It was in Bismarck. You can look at their application, who is also assisting them. And last night I count 13 places that this thing is saying that, hey, these are going in here and this is what it's for this and that. We're the only ones that don't know about it, and this is where it's going. So it's important that the people get to know what's happening around them. And I think 5 miles is a minimum, especially when they're paying the bill. It ain't the county paying the bill. They're going to pay the bill. And I think 5 miles of notification to have something that could harm you, even further than that, like I said, 12 miles. You know, it's proven 12 miles. I think that's important, that we gotta stick to this stuff and get the right amount of distance setbacks on all of this. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anybody from the public?
Good evening, I guess it is.
Yeah.
Tom Ely. Maybe Denise can help me on this. We use this in our, where did it come from? Okay.
Mr. County data. So he researched the counties, right, Mr. Josephson?
Actually, we went to emergency management.
Oh, okay.
And they, told them the setbacks, and they went ahead and they were able to show that.
And then you gave that to us. So
Okay.
that's what we used. Yep. Right.
I just found an item on the state of North Dakota, and you were talking about wetlands. They have it listed under avoidance areas.
Oh.
Wind towers should be avoided in woodlands, wetlands, historic areas within city limits, military bases, geologically unstable, woodlands, wetlands, areas of recreational significance.
So that's a state.
That's
a
the state of
law.
North Dakota.
Okay. And how do they define then wetlands? I
That's,
think-
that's all it says. Like I said, I'm not sure where it came from.
If that's the wetland, did they say
Diameter?
so far away from it?
It just should
Not
be
in this
avoided.
sheet. That's why I was asking where it came
Oh.
from. This is what we use to kind of come up with some of our distances and stuff.
I'm sorry,
So-
Tom, what sheet are you referring to? Is that, I thought you were talking about the GIS thing. Oh, yeah, that was something I put together. That was something that I put together, and yes, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're
No,
right,
that's all
that
right.
is part of the PSC process, is they define avoidance areas, and they also define exclusion areas too. So
Oh, so
that
when you
is in
say-
the state, that is in the PSC.
When you say state of North Dakota on there, you mean if it goes through the PSC then?
If it goes to
now
the
that we
PSC,
know They
yes.
don't all go through that. So I guess we could
Okay.
copy that language then, again. That would be a prudent way to do it again.
You're going down a slippery slope if you start putting that language in there, because every little creek, every little.
No, the state doesn't say,
The state
our
don't-
language said National Wetland Inventory, and that's not what the state was referencing. That was something we thought would be helpful to define what a wetland was, but in this case, it's not super helpful.
Right.
Because it's basically any low-lying area that could possibly have water in it is what it seems like that is on that registry. So we're back to the same dilemma of how do you define a wetland, but at least the language would be there from the state level down to our level, provided it doesn't go to PSC, it would then apply to any project as well.
I just brought it up because that was a topic of discussion.
Yeah,
And that's the
thank
only
you.
thing I could find on it, so.
Mr.
And
Freilich,
then,
maybe the state does define it, so I don't know.
and then,
That's the problem with all these things.
as far as a per turbine cost, and Ms. Soboluk was asking about if there's any decommissioning plans or bonds. Stark County has one for the Brady Project 1, and they set it at $55,000 per turbine. So right now, there's a $14 million bond to take down 87 turbines. That's what's sitting in Stark. The rest are in Hettinger County. So either the county's on the hook, the people are on the hook, or does it go to the state? If the Brady collapses and nobody takes ownership of the wind towers. So I think the decommissioning bond, and I'll echo Mr. Berwick, is something that you really need to consider. You really need to look at it. Because this is the surety bond, and it's signed for $14 million. And basically, that's it. And that is public record here at Stark County. And again, they signed it based on $55,000 per turbine. And the Brady 2 out of Hettinger County, they demanded $130,000 per turbine surety bond. So I just think that it's very important that we keep an eye on that. So, and thank you all for your diligence, and I know this was a lot to go through. It still is a lot to go through, but I liked all the suggestions so far. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Christy Goodall. And just to piggyback on the last statement, on page 50 of that 69-page document from the Game and Fish in June 2021, it just says, there is a section on page 50 that says designated state parks, forest management lands, game refuges, game management areas. North Dakota Century Code 690608 lists criteria that must guide the energy conversion facility site suitability evaluation process, and so they would have to follow that because there are inclusion areas here in Stark County, and it does give a map of geographical areas that must be included that include wildlife management areas. It lists several things such as state parks, forest management lands, grasslands, game refuges, game management areas, and nature preserves. And in Stark County, we do have wildlife, specifically swamp lands and wildlife management areas that are all defined. So thank you again, Mr. Freilich, for bringing that up because I think it's a huge part of what should be addressed. And that is outlined again in that document. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment?
Hi,
No.
I'm Tess Ely, and I'm a Stark County taxpayer. My job allows me to talk to a lot of people, and I often talk about wind turbines and to get their feeling for them. And, are they for them? Are they against them? And overwhelmingly, people do not want these wind turbines. And an example, a lady I was talking to, I asked her what she thought of wind turbines, and she teared up. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen. She goes, no, I got to tell you, I lived in New England, and I had the most beautiful scene out my window. And she said the Brady project came through, and she said it was loud, it was ugly. She said we had to, just so we could get some sleep in our lives, we had to sell our property for a fraction of what it was worth, and now we're living in Dickinson. And the tears were coming down her face. I felt so bad for this woman. And then I talked to another lady that they lived up in Beulah, and when towers went in up there, they were gonna put them on her property, and she said, no, I won't have them on my property. So they put it on the property next door. And she said it was so loud, they moved out of that area. Their farm is still sitting empty. And she said the lady that they put the turbine on moved down to Arizona because she couldn't listen to it either. She's getting paid every year, but these people leave their homes when they're within a distance of those wind towers. You got to get far enough away to where it's not affecting your life in such a negative way, and especially when it starts hitting you financially and you got your retirement planned, and then all of a sudden you got a fraction of that because now your property isn't valued at what it should be. So anyway, consider what people are going through that have to deal with these on a day-to-day basis when you make your decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Any other comment? Any other comment from the public? If not, I'll close the public hearing. And I guess our plan now is, Deneen, you're gonna kind of come up with a draft on that, or?
I'd be happy to, but I would imagine
You
Steve
have
and
Steve with
Amanda
you, Steve
probably
with
would
you,
like
help,
to add
yes.
input. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and then we'll bring that to our next,
Request.
bring
I
that to our,
just, I just think that that we should, I mean, as long as that just stays on what we talked about today and there's no additional verbiage. And what we agreed upon today on everything is what should be in the draft.
And I did write everything down. If you guys need me to come in or something and let me know, or if you want to talk on the phone, we can compare notes for sure. That'd be fine.
okay, and that draft will be brought to our next meeting. I made a mistake earlier. I said it was the 24th is our next meeting. It's actually the 31st of March.
So is there a possibility we can make a motion to accept the changes that we did today? And then once the draft, or once it is complete next month, then we can,
I think without seeing it.
I'll just make a
without-
motion that we accept I would like to make a motion that we accept all the changes that we've made today to get this going and not just table month after month after month. So that's my motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would second that, just to get it on there, because we can still make our changes if we find something that doesn't quite agree with us at the next meeting anyway.
Right, and then commissioners, I just wanted to ask, so do you want to then advertise for another public hearing? Since the ordinance will have changed somewhat from what the committee put together?
I think that's fine. Yeah.
Do you want it, I would say that should be part of a motion too.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, I will amend my motion to say that we accept the changes that were done today, and we will also have another public hearing at the next meeting to be able to listen to the public input on anything they have to say about the changes.
Still second.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion?
So I'm slightly confused. So we're accepting what's not written yet?
We're
That's
just,
troublesome to me. Or we're just accepting what we talked about to be put into record by the staff?
yes.
Yeah,
I follow along with Commissioner Soblick. I understand and all of the thought process and everything that went in today, I accept all of it, but I want to see it in writing.
Yeah.
I want to see it in writing before I say yes or no.
Well, and that's what my motion meant, that we accept everything that we had talked about today. So it gets put into, not a draft for next month, but it gets put into an actual ordinance, so it can be voted on, and we don't have to go month to month and month to have these public hearings.
But it needs to be a draft till we vote on it, so it will have to be a draft before we come to that meeting, correct?
Yes, it'll be a draft that we vote on, is what I meant. Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
Which opens it up for any changes if you feel there's one necessary.
yes, which will open it up to any
Okay,
changes
so-
or amendments, and then we have a public hearing, again, and then that way we can vote on it, because I don't know, my motion's getting too long. I guess I'll go into discussion after I made that motion. And what I meant, now I'm in discussion, so I don't have to do that motion. Okay. Do we have the motion down?
Exactly, so I have a motion that we accept all the changes made today and have a public hearing at the next meeting to hear public input on those changes.
On the draft?
Okay, on the draft, okay.
Yes. And now that the reason I have done that in discussion, because I don't want to table this month to month to month and keep on having public hearings, because I don't think that is not also fair to the public.
But I think it's fair for everyone to be able to read it in writing before we approve anything. So
And that's what we'll do next month.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so as long as we're not approving that this is getting like signed and put into ordinance, I would
Okay.
be okay with us approving for it to go to draft, another draft to look at next month again, or in the upcoming month.
Okay.
Would it be better then to motion to approve Steve and Deneen and I guess myself to rewrite with the changes and then present it to the Planning and Zoning Commission
That's kind of
next
what my
month?
motion meant.
Well, what you meant and how it reads are two different things, though. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on what you guys are, what you want. So.
Okay. Please add to my motion. Please add to my motion that everything that we had talked about today, everything we agreed on today will be put into a draft for next month's meeting by Mr. Josephson, Ms. Ingolstead, and Ms. Dressler without any extra add-ons. And then at that meeting, the draft will be brought forward to make a final vote.
So you want to withdraw the previous one and then just make this a new motion?
Yeah.
You need Commissioner Richie.
You don't have to withdraw it, we're just collecting.
Just collecting it. You don't have to withdraw it, just add on to it.
On the same motion.
Yep.
Okay. After all that, any other discussion?
Listen to it again, I think.
State's attorney.
Okay. Roll call vote then. Commissioner Arthod,
Aye.
Commissioner Richard,
Aye.
Commissioner Kuntz,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson. Commissioner Larson. Okay, Commissioner Dressler,
Aye.
Commissioner Freilich,
Aye.
Commissioner Zobeluk,
Aye.
Commissioner Walla.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion carries. Okay, now we move on to the next item is planning items. We have the floodplain management. Mr. Josephson.
Right, thank you, Commissioners. I'll try and make this as brief as possible. Both the State Water Commission and FEMA have done a restudy of the flood insurance rate maps that were done back in 2010. And this involved the entire county, not just the unincorporated county, but also the various cities. As part of this process, they have reviewed our floodplain regulations along with those of the cities and have said, in order for the floodplain, the new flood insurance maps to become effective, the local governments need to change their ordinances so that they reflect what's in the national flood insurance, the federal requirements and the state requirements for this. So I've been working with staff of the state water department, and based upon a model that they gave them, I'm proposing to add in Section 3 a floodplain management ordinance. That's it. I did have this reviewed by Cole Baker of the Water Commission, who sent me an email and saying that what's in here meets the minimums, the minimum of the National Flood Insurance Program. Also looking at changing the floodplain overlay district in order to match up with this. So the thing is that the maps become effective on July the 5th. The county needs to approve changes to its ordinance at least a month in advance. So I brought this forward hoping that this can come to a public hearing at the next Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. And then, look at this to come to the county commission in enough time that the county can approve this, and then have our 30-day notice so that we will be in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program requirements.
Okay.
So that's what you have in front of you.
You have any questions for Mr. Josephson? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve this to have our public hearing at our next meeting.
I'll make a motion for a public hearing scheduled for the next meeting with staff recommendations related to floodplain
Management.
overlay district
Or ordinance.
ordinance.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There you go.
A
There we go.
second?
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. The only other thing is that in April, our meeting is scheduled for the 28th, and I guess I'd like to change it to the week before, if that's possible, for a conflict, or scheduling conflict, if that's all right with you. For the April meeting from the 28th to the 21st.
Repeat that again, the April 28th back to
Yeah,
21st.
so the 21st, a week earlier, yeah. Is that all right, or would you like to look for a motion to approve that?
I'd move to approve.
You have a motion to have a second?
I don't know.
April. Yes. You have a second?
I'll second.
Have a second. Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'll revise the schedule and make sure it gets put on the county's website.
Okay. If there's nothing else, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
You have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?